Sup folks, welcome to the part 8, of What If Deku Become a Healer Hero, Chapter 20. The chief of police visits them the next morning. Kami and the hero manual are here too, but they stay silent as Chief Tsuragami tells them of Stain's condition. Then, to the trio's surprise, he informs them that they must be punished for yesterday's incident because they used their quirks without permission. Understandably, this pisses off Todoroki. He defends their actions a bit too aggressively for Izuku's comfort and claims that if they had not acted then Native would have been killed. He also claims that Izuku shouldn't get in trouble because he didn't use his quirk to fight. Kami interjects at this, saying that Izuku isn't supposed to use his quirk without the supervision of a licensed healer. In the end, the chief of police does them a favor. Since there were very few witnesses to the event, he's willing to sweep this under the rug. The incident will remain undisclosed and Endeavor will take credit for defeating the hero killer. However, as a result, none of them will get any recognition for their efforts. It's a small price, one they're willing to pay for the pardon. Kami still takes the chance to scold Izuku for willingly running into a fight, though. Geez, kid, what did I tell you about listening to the heroes? She gives him a light chop on the head. Sorry, Kami-san, he apologizes, then adds, I'm glad you're okay. She waves him off. Ah, it was just a concussion. She points to the bandage wrapped around her head. They fixed me up just fine. Well, then, Chief Tsuragami woofs, if that's all, I should be going. He turns to leave. But Ida interrupts him. Wait. Sir. They all glance at Ida in surprise. The blue-haired boy's eyes dart to Izuku briefly before he frowns. It's just something I've been concerned about. Stain mentioned Shigaraki having an interest in Midoriya-kun. He said he'd been shown a picture of him. Izuku blinks. In the chaos of the night, he'd totally forgotten about that little detail. It's disturbing, to say the least. But not entirely unexpected. Recalling his conversation with All Might after USJ, he supposes that he shouldn't be surprised that Shigaraki has taken an interest in him. Him healing All Might messed up the villain's plan. But before he can panic, he reminds himself that there's still no need to worry. Shigaraki made a big mistake and All Might is still strong. Sure, the news is a little unnerving, but for the most part it doesn't change anything. He wishes he could reassure his friends of this, but it'd be difficult without going into his conversation with All Might. Chief Tsuragami tilts his head. The villains Shigaraki and Kurogiri were spotted by chance on top of a water tower in Hazu last night. It is assumed that the League of Villains are responsible for the attack on the city. If what you say is true, then Stain most likely has connections to the League. As for Shigaraki's interest, the dog turns to look at Izuku. I will let others know, but I wouldn't worry about it too much if I were you. Last night's attack resulted in 2 healers getting seriously injured. The heroes will no doubt be on high alert. With that said, he bows his head, politely and leaves. Kami and Manuel bid their goodbyes as well, leaving the trio alone once again. Todoroki frowns. He probably means that my father will increase security around healers now. At Izuku's expression, he adds, not necessarily because he's worried, mostly because it looks bad for the agency. 2 of his healers were hospitalized on his watch. He'll get bad press if he doesn't do anything. Sighing, he sits back down on his bed and muses, I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to prevent healers from leaving the agency at all before someone manages to talk sense into him. Oh. Izuku's eyes drop to his lap, lingering on his bandaged calf. He feels Todoroki gazing at him for a few moments before the boy says, by the way, I'd like to apologize on behalf of my father's agency and myself for not being able to protect you better. Huh? Izuku looks up. Both of our healers got hurt even when they had protection, Todoroki says. Ida sighs, neither of you would have gotten injured if I hadn't been stupid enough to go after Stain. This is all my fault. No, Todoroki says, then adds, well, yeah, that wasn't a good idea, but don't blame yourself. Native, probably would have died if you had done nothing. I should have before he can start putting the blame on himself. Izuku interrupts, alright, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It's no one's fault. Let's just, I don't know, take this experience for what it was and let it encourage us to do better in the future? It's kind of lame and comes out sounding like a question, but it seems to satisfy his friends. Ida is quiet for a moment, then says, and I'm sorry for what I said before. Of course you're a hero, I'm sorry for saying that you weren't. Izuku smiles and Ida lifts his head to give him a solemn look. But please, never do something like that again. Izuku blinks. What? Rushing into a fight like that? Ida shakes his head. Midoriya-kun, you could have been killed. Izuku's eyes widen. He can't believe what he's hearing. But I agree, Todoroki says, you got lucky this time, but that's only because Stain was reluctant to kill healers. The next villain might not be so kind. Izuku protests, but if I had done nothing, then I'm not trying to say that I'm ungrateful. Ida tries to reassure, it's just. He trails off, looking a bit hesitant. Todoroki turns to Izuku. You're not a fighter, he says, his voice soothing but firm. You're a healer. Your place isn't on the battlefield. Izuku swallows back a retort, trying to quell the indignation flaring in his chest. He knows that. Of course he knows that. But it still leaves a bitter taste in the back of his throat. Blinking away the tears that sting the edges of his eyes, he turns away and leans back against his pillows, dropping his gaze to his lap. Fine. He doesn't see the glance Todoroki and Ida share. The news story breaks out about an hour later. There's no TV in their room, but their phones suddenly start blowing up with texts from their classmates. The official story released by the police was that when 7 pro heroes and 3 high school interns came across the hero killer, Endeavor took care of the situation. Ida, Todoroki, and Izuku's name were not made public, but it's not hard for their classmates to figure out who those students were since Ida's internship was in Hazu and Todoroki was with his father. Granted, no one knew that Izuku was with the Endeavor agency too, but the story mentioned that one of the students was a healer in training, so it's kind of obvious. Kaken even calls Izuku, who smiles apologetically at Ida and Todoroki before limping out of the room to take the call in the hallway. What the fuck is this shit I'm hearing on the news? Kaken demands as soon as he puts the phone to his ear, you were fucking attacked by the hero killer? Don't worry, Kaken, everything's fine, Izuku reassures, leaning heavily against the wall. Weren't you listening? Endeavor saved us. Are you alright? Kaken presses stubbornly, where are you? Izuku hesitates, glancing down at his bandaged stomach and leg, before saying, Yeah, I'm fine. I'm back at Endeavor's agency. He feels bad lying to his best friend, but he knows the blonde will only worry incessantly if he tells him the truth. Anyway, I've got to get back to work, but I'll text you later, okay? Kaken grumbles out a response and Izuku hastily hangs up. The rest of the day goes by slowly. Ida gets discharged around noon thanks to Izuku's healing. His injuries were minor. The Namu had knocked him aside pretty roughly with its wing when it snatched Izuku, so the doctors kept him overnight just in case, but there's no reason for him to stay any longer. As for Todoroki, since he has relatively light injuries, he intends to return to his father's agency later in the evening. Endeavor, however, is apparently insisting that they both come back to the agency. The doctors don't seem too happy about it, but since the Endeavor agency does have a good medical center they reluctantly discharge Izuku too. Despite his injured arm, Todoroki carries both their bags while they make their way out of the hospital. Izuku feels bad about it, but there isn't much he can do about it since he needs crutches just to be able to limp around. The stitches under his ribcage pull uncomfortably the whole time, but he doesn't have to go very far. A fancy car is sent to pick them up at the front of the hospital. Is Kami-san not here? Izuku asks, noticing the absence of his mentor. A sidekick steps out of the passenger side and opens the back door for him. "No," she says, taking his crutches and helping him inside. Endeavor doesn't want any of his healers to leave the agency unless it's absolutely necessary. As Todoroki slides in beside him, Izuku notices that rather than there being just one sidekick who drives, they're accompanied by 3 sidekicks. Izuku glances at Todoroki, who simply shrugs as if to say "I told you." When they return to the agency, the sidekicks lead them to the medical center and take Todoroki's bags, which contain both his and Izuku's torn costumes. Kami greets them and begins checking over their injuries. "Osaki-san would use his quirk on you guys," she says, but he's kind of had his hands full with dealing with the sidekick's injuries after last night. "Those namas are nasty things." "Yeah." Izuku frowns. It's concerning to know that there are multiple of those beasts. He's just glad that none of them seems to be as strong as the one at USJ was. Pushing away those thoughts, he looks at Todoroki, who is sitting on the end of his bed. "What are you going to do? You're not going to be training, with your arm all messed up like that, right?" Todoroki shakes his head. "My old man's probably going to be busy dealing with the press for a couple of days." A small smile pulls at his lips. He hates doing press work. He's going to be miserable. The pleased look on his face has Izuku giggling. Kami uses her quirk on both of them before ordering Izuku to sleep. He stays in one of the rooms in the medical center, since it's kind of pointless to send him back to his guest room when it's so difficult for him to move around, but Todoroki bids him good night and goes back to wherever he stays during the night. He doesn't sleep as well as he did the previous night, the pain from his injuries occasionally waking him up. There isn't much for him to do during the next day, or the day after that. Kami still teaches him more about the world of hero healers and even shows him how to use some of their expensive equipment, but he laments not being able to practice training his quirk. Of course, just when he thought he might have figured something out with it, he goes and gets injured. It's frustrating, but at least Todoroki has time to hang out with him now. Like he said, Endeavor is too busy dealing with the press to train him, so the bicolored boy spends much of the day with Izuku. It's kind of nice. Todoroki is easy to talk to, and he doesn't seem to mind when Kami takes Izuku's attention away to teach him something new. He even brings Izuku his meals from the dining commons and eats on the bed with him so that he doesn't have to move around too much. "Oh, you, what a gentleman." Kami coos, ruffling Todoroki's hair as she passes by. His messed up hair coupled with his bewildered expression sends Izuku into another fit of giggles. "Sorry about her," he snorts. "Here, I can." He reaches out to fix Todoroki's hair, only to freeze before touching him. For some reason, he wonders if this is okay, if maybe he's pushing any boundaries. It's just hair, but Todoroki has never seemed the physically affectionate type, and knowing his past, Izuku doesn't blame him. Todoroki blinks curiously at his silence, eyes darting to his hovering hand. Then, he slowly leans his head forward, wordlessly giving him permission. Izuku's lips twitch upwards as he lays his hand on his friend's hair. It's surprisingly soft, sliding easily through his fingers as he goes about fixing the strands, separating the white from the red and smoothing it down. Todoroki remains quiet, eyes fluttering slightly when Izuku accidentally pulls on a tuft. As Izuku gently combs the boy's hair with his fingers, he feels his ear brush against the side of his palm. Blinking in surprise, Izuku slowly lets his hand lower until he's cupping the left side of Todoroki's face. His scar feels rough under his fingertips. Izuku tilts his head curiously, gaze fixated on where their skin meets. It's strange, not having his quirk automatically activate in response to such a blatant scar. It's something he's always had to be cautious about when healing Todoroki, to be careful not to linger too long or else he'd heal the scar as well. He supposes, now, that he's never been able to casually touch Todoroki like he does with the rest of his friends. Another part of him wonders if, considering his past, Todoroki could be touch-starved. His eyes trail away from the scar to meet Todoroki's mismatched gaze, The boy is staring at him silently. Izuku's cheeks heat up. He'd been so wrapped up in his thoughts, he didn't realize that he's just been cupping his friend's cheek for an uncomfortable amount of time. "Sorry," he yelps, yanking his hand away, and scrambling backwards. Unfortunately, since they were eating dinner on the bed, he accidentally kicks his utensils and they clatter to the ground. Flustered, he practically dives off the bed to go after them. "Shit, sorry, I'll get how." Midoriya. Todoroki jumps to his feet and grabs him by the shoulders to steady him. "Did you just step on the fork?" "Nope." Izuku squeaks, even though he totally did. He hides his injured foot by leaning on his good leg. "Nope, I just, moved too quickly and pulled on my stitches, that's all, but I'm fine." Todoroki looks a little unconvinced, but gently pushes him back to the bed. "Well, alright, but take it easy. I can pick this up." Once Izuku is seated on the mattress again, Todoroki quickly picks up the fallen utensils and puts them back onto the tray. Izuku's face is still hot and for some reason his heart feels like it's trying to beat out of his chest. What is happening? Even calm, cool, and collected Todoroki is looking a little ruffled. I should probably… yeah, Izuku manages to stammer out. Todoroki nods jerkily and grabs both their trays, obviously trying to retreat as quickly as possible. "I'll, see you tomorrow." Izuku gives him a weak smile and flops back onto the bed once he's gone. When Kami comes by to check on him a few minutes later, she finds him curled up on his side clutching a pillow to his very red face. "Is your foot bleeding?" she asks. Izuku just groans into his pillow. Eventually, Todoroki does have to return to Endeavor once the man has finished dealing with the press. Izuku isn't sure if there will be any regulation changes in regards to the protection of healers from now on, but he does know that there was some fuss from the press about his and Kami's injuries. He's been checking his social media every morning and the press was not afraid to criticize Endeavor for this mishap, despite the Flame Hero's supposed victory over Stain. They even went as far to bring up Osaki's kidnapping. He figures this is what Todoroki meant when he said that two healers being injured would look bad for the agency. By the end of the week, Izuku's wounds are mostly healed. He can walk around with only a slight limp, but his quirk still won't work until he's completely better. As much as he regrets not being able to train with it more, he is satisfied with all that he's learned during his internship. He bows politely to Kami and thanks her for everything she's taught him. Don't mention it, kid," she says, ruffling his curls. "It was my pleasure. I'm sorry I couldn't help you out with your quirk more, though." "It's alright," he says, "I learned plenty even without it." Kami grins and walks him to the car that's going to take him home. Like before, there are 3 sidekicks waiting to accompany him. "I'd go with you," she says as he gets into the car, but the big guy's being sniffy about his healers staying close to the agency with all that's gone on this week. Izuku nods understandingly and bids her goodbye. During the ride home, he texts Todoroki, who he hasn't had as much time to hang out with during the past couple of days thanks to his father. Thankfully, Todoroki says they've been doing less patrolling and more internal stuff, Endeavor showing him how to run a hero agency. Todoroki 12:35 p.m. He's basically been teaching me how to boss everyone around. Izuku snickers. He can practically hear the other boy's dry tone as he reads the message. Despite enjoying his internship week, for the most part, he's glad to be home. Inko seems pleased that he was escorted home by 3 sidekicks and is thrilled to see him, giving him a tight hug that makes his wounds ache. He hides his discomfort with a smile and forces himself not to limp as he walks inside the house, only to be nearly knocked over by Sushi as the cat bowls into him. "Oh, he really missed you." Inko coos. Izuku snorts and nuzzles his furry friend. "I miss you too, buddy." For some reason, when Izuku later tells Kaken to come over so they can properly chat about their internship experiences, the blonde refuses. No matter how much Izuku presses, Kaken won't budge, And he won't give him a good reason either. It's suspicious, so Izuku takes matters into his own hands and walks over to the other boy's house. Auntie Mitsuki lets him in with a grin, and when he sees Kaken, he stops dead in his tracks. Not a word. Kaken growls. Izuku tries. He really does. But seeing his childhood friend's perfectly combed hair is too much for him to handle. He bursts out laughing. Thanks to Kami's quirk, by Monday Izuku's injuries are completely healed. He's extremely grateful he might be able to fool his mother, but Kaken would definitely notice if he was hiding a limb. Unfortunately, it looks like he's going to have a couple of scars on his ribcage and leg, which he wouldn't mind except he doesn't know if they'll interact with his quirk. Recovery girl eases his worries by pricking her own finger and having him heal it. To his relief, his quirk works just fine. That's a relief, he sighs, leaning back. I've never had a scar before, so I didn't know if it would. He trails off when he sees his mentor's tight expression. What? Recovery girl purses her lips. I just feel bad, I suppose. Only a month into school and you already have scars. Izuku's eyes widen and he hastens to reassure her. Don't worry. He says, I don't mind, really. Mirio-senpai says that scars build character. She frowns in confusion. What? Well, I offered to heal the scars on his arms once and he said that scars build character. Izuku's sweat drops. I guess it made more sense when he said it. Recovery girl peers at him for a moment, then huffs. Of course he would say something like that. But that's not really where I was going with this. You've gotten into more danger in the first month of your high school career than any healer should in their lifetime. Izuku winces. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, she says, leaning back in her seat. You shouldn't have had to go through something so scary. I couldn't believe my ears when I got that call. She gives him a look. And once again, you ran headlong into danger. Granted, the heroes could have done more to prevent your ambulance from getting attacked in the first place, but facing down the hero killer? Really? He knows his mentor is just worried about him, much like his friends were, but he still feels annoyance stir in his chest. His displeasure must show on his face because Recovery Girl presses her lips together and sighs, well, I'm just glad you're alright. The genuine relief in her tone makes his heart ache slightly, and he averts his eyes. I was still pretty useless in battle, he admits regretfully, just like during USJ. Recalling how he used Todoroki's chunks of ice to defend himself against Stain, he asks, is there any way I can, I dunno, add a weapon to my costume? Of course, Recovery Girl says, surprising him, I was actually going to suggest that. He blinks, glancing up. Huh? Well, if you're going to make a habit of putting yourself in danger, it's certainly a good idea. It's not uncommon for a healer to have a weapon of their own. Kami-san probably has one, especially since she's a combat medic. His mentor lifts her syringe cane. This is my weapon. Izuku is even more confused. Huh? You should mention it to your teachers, she continues, ignoring his obvious bewilderment, see what fits. She turns back to her desk while Izuku tries to wrap his mind around the new information. Recovery Girl's cane isn't actually a cane but a weapon? How? Is it like Bo's staff? No, it's too short. She's too short, he can't even imagine her fighting. He tries to picture it in his mind, but fails miserably. Well, there isn't much going on today, Recovery Girl says, getting his attention. There's a rescue race training during your hero class that I think you are capable of participating in. So do your best and don't get injured, cause after school we're going to work on your quirk more. You said you were starting to get somewhere with it before Hazu, right? Izuku nods. Then let's focus on that. The second years are doing an exercise with ectoplasm that is particularly foolish if you ask me, so there will be plenty of injuries for you to practice with. She sends him off before turning back to her desk with a huff, grumbling under her breath about the severe lack of mental capabilities of some of the teachers. Izuku walks away wordlessly. Well, whatever kind of fighter recovery girl is, he has no doubt that she's a ruthless one. The rescue race training is very fun, and even though his quirk doesn't help him out with stuff like this, Izuku is fast enough to at least not get last place in his group. It's nice to work up a sweat ever since he started at A. He hasn't had much time to go on the long runs he used to go on. He wants to improve his physical skill so if he ever encounters a villain like Stain again he can be more useful. That was some hard training, Sato says as they get changed in the locker rooms. It's our first class in a while, that made me sweat. Aoyama wipes his sweaty face with his cape. I need to work on my mobility, Kirishima says. He glances at Izuku next to him. You are pretty good, Midoriya-kun. Thanks. Izuku smiles. He's still coming down from the adrenaline high, so he doesn't think twice about taking off his jumpsuit. Kirishima's eyes widen. Whoa, dude, where'd that come from? Izuku glances down and spots the long scar on his left ribcage from where he got stabbed. Shit, right. Kirishima's loud exclamation has caught the attention of a few others, including Kaken. Izuku hastily covers his scar with his shirt as the blonde looks over. It's nothing. He stammers, frantically trying to think his way out of this. Suddenly, he feels a presence behind him and a cold, frost-covered hand slides over his ribs. It's just a bruise, Todoroki says. Kirishima stares at him like he's crazy. Dude, that's not it, Todoroki talks over him, subtly trying to shield Izuku's body with his own. Kaken's eyes narrow. If you're done changing, then you should make your way back to the classroom promptly. Ida shouts, taking the attention away from Izuku. He chops his hands wildly. Punctuality is an important attribute for students of a school as prestigious as Alright, geez, Kaminari gripes, struggling with his tie, we're going. As the other boys grumble, Izuku lets out a quiet sigh of relief. Kirishima is still staring at him in confusion, but when Izuku gives him a pleading look, the redhead glances between him and Kaken. Understanding seems to dawn on his face. Yo, Bakugo-kun. He says, walking over to the blonde, race you back to class. Kaken wrinkles his nose. What the fuck? That's stupid as hell, no way. Kirishima pauses, then turns his head away with a smirk. Yeah, never mind. You probably wouldn't be much of a competition anyways. The reaction is instantaneous. What the fuck? Do you wanna dye shitty hair? Let's fucking go, then. Oi, don't get a head start. I'm gonna kick your ass after I win. Todoroki lets out a quiet huff and turns back to Izuku. The freckled boy smiles gratefully at him. Thank you, he says softly. Todoroki nods and looks down to where his hand is still touching Izuku's ribs. His hand is covered in a thin layer of frost, preventing Izuku's quirk from activating through skin contact. He slowly swipes his thumb over the scar, causing Izuku to shiver, goosebumps breaking over his skin. Todoroki-kun? He swallows, suddenly finding it a little harder to breathe. When did the air get so thin? The taller boy has him cornered against the lockers, but he doesn't even seem to notice. His mismatched eyes stay transfixed on the scar as his thumb gently runs over it. He almost looks sad, regretful. Izuku blinks, trying to ignore the way his heart is seemingly trying to beat out of his chest. Todoroki-kun? Todoroki looks up at him then, slowly tearing his eyes away from the scar to meet his gaze. Neither of them say anything for a few moments. Then, you shouldn't have any. Izuku frowns. What? A quiet sigh, and then Todoroki's other hand slowly comes up to brush his fingers around his own scar around his eye. You shouldn't have any, he repeats, just as softly. Scars, I mean. Stain. If I had just Todoroki-kun. Izuku shakes his head, pulling away from Todoroki's icy touch. Don't blame yourself for this. Todoroki presses his lips together. If I had been stronger but you weren't. The other boy flinches, but Izuku continues, you weren't. Because, you are a 15-year-old boy who fought against a villain responsible for the deaths of numerous pro-heroes. You'll get stronger, Todoroki-kun, don't worry. Izuku smiles. You held your own against the hero killer. Give yourself some credit. We wouldn't have made it out alive if it weren't for you. Todoroki doesn't really look convinced, but steps back to give Izuku space to put his shirt back on. Izuku turns around, noticing that his ribs still feel cold. His heart is still beating rapidly too, although he isn't really sure why. This isn't the first time it's done this around Todoroki. Maybe he's getting sick? He should do some more research on heart arrhythmias with Recovery Girl later. Alright, let's go. The rest of his classes pass by fairly quickly, and then comes his lesson with Recovery Girl. Like she said, there are a good number of second years in need of healing. Wanting to give him plenty of chances to get familiar with this new output controlling technique, she leaves the majority of the students to him, only using her own quirk on the more serious injuries. Once again, he tries to focus on where his energy leaves his body through his fingertips. It feels strange, now that he's aware of it, like a channel flowing through his fingers. He pictures the hose in his mind and does everything he can to narrow it down, to stem the flow of energy. It's difficult, to say the least. Especially since whatever he's trying to manipulate is in no way tangible. He supposes it's more of a mental thing. He does his best to concentrate, but it doesn't help that his quirk automatically shuts off as soon as the injury is healed. By the end of his lesson, he's frustrated and drained. Recovery Girl reassures him that this new development is a good thing. When he described his strange new awareness of this intangible part of his body that he had never really felt before, she said that it must have something to do with his quirk. That this must be his body giving him some way to control his ability. She seems so certain, and his fingertips still tingle, so he does his best not to be too disheartened. He's soon distracted by All Might, who asks to speak with him after his lesson. The hero is still in his muscled form as he leads him to the teacher's lounge, but once he closes the door he deflects. Have you talked to Sir Night-Eye? Izuku asks as soon as they're alone. All Might glances at him in surprise before his expression smooths into a smile. Yes, I did. He called me not long after you left his agency. And? Izuku prompts. All Might slowly sits down on the couch, a soft smile still on his face. His blue eyes look thoughtful. We've spoken a few times since. Our bond is mending. I was truly surprised to learn that he held no ill will towards me. After everything. Izuku sits across from him and arches an eyebrow. You should have seen his agency, he says bluntly. There was a giant cardboard cutout of you in his office. Trust me, our will is the last thing on his mind. All Might chuckles. Ah, yes. He's always been a bit of a fanboy. It's one hell of an understatement, one Izuku ignores in favor of asking. He mentioned he wanted you to find a successor after you got injured. Is it Mirio-senpai? It's half-baked theory, one formed out of mild curiosity as to the older boy's place in all this. He could just happen to be someone Sir Night-Eye has taken an interest in, but something about him tells Izuku otherwise. All Might briefly looks surprised. How much did Night-Eye tell you? His voice has an odd tone to it, one that Izuku doesn't know how to interpret. About Mirio-senpai? Not much. All Might pauses, then says, I'm going to meet with young Tagada soon. I guess we'll see how it goes. Izuku nods, wondering how the #1 hero will go about mentoring Mirio if he does take him as a successor. Their quirks aren't very similar, but maybe it's more about the whole symbol of peace thing? Mirio's definitely got that type of personality, and his quirk could easily put him in the top 10 once he's a pro hero. All Might seems to hesitate for a moment. Izuku tilts his head curiously, but all the man says is, anyway, how did the rest of your internship go? Chio-san told me about your encounter with the hero killer, so that's why I texted you that night, but I didn't have the chance to check in with you afterwards. Oh, it was fine. I learned a lot. Izuku trails off. He can't imagine why All Might would be curious about healer stuff, though there's a good chance he's probably just asking to be polite. Instead, Izuku finds himself talking about Stain. How he ran after the Namu attacked his ambulance, how he found Stain right when he was about to kill Ida, how useless he was during the fight, how even his friends told him that it wasn't his place to get involved in that. Just talking about it leaves him feeling bitter. He also mentions what Stain said about Shigaraki having his eye on him. That seems to make All Might concerned more so than anything else. He said, "What, my boy?" Taken aback by his reaction, Izuku explains, he said that Shigaraki showed him a picture of me. And he had said that I was troublesome. Stain even knew my name. All Might swallows thickly and puts his chin in his hands, elbows perched on his knees as he hunches forward, brows furrowed in contemplation. He looks so tense that it makes Izuku nervous. "All Might?" he questions. The man sighs through his nose. "After the attack on Hazu, Sir Night-Eye and I spoke again. With all that has happened, this League of Villains might be more of a problem than we thought." He theorized that there might be someone behind this, acting as the brains of the League of Villains. Principal Nezu-san had previously brought up the idea of Shigaraki being guided by someone, and now I believe it might be true. He looks grim. Izuku is about to ask who he thinks it is, when he says, "I believe this person might be the villain who I fought with 6 years ago. The one that hurt me." Izuku's eyes widen. "What? But I thought you defeated him?" "I thought so too," All Might admits, "but it makes sense. That villain. I know him well. And this. Everything that he's doing, it's exactly his style. And it makes sense that it's him." How Shigaraki knew that I was injured, the Namus. He cuts himself off abruptly. Izuku frowns in confusion. All Might shakes his head quickly and clenches his fists. "It sets my teeth on edge to think that he still managed to survive after our fight. And now with what you've told me." He grits his teeth. "I can't begin to imagine why someone like him has taken an interest in you." Izuku swallows nervously. He's never seen All Might look so distraught before. This villain must be truly horrible if he can make the #1 hero look like this. There's still a lot Izuku's confused about, but a thought pops into his head. What if he's still hurt? He suggests warily, what if he needs a healer? "I mean, I was the only one able to heal you. I bet this guy is in the same weakened state that you were in." All Might stares at him. Izuku recalls the way Kurogiri looked at him during USJ. A knot of fear grows in his throat. So that means... No, young Midoriya, All Might interrupts, leaning forward to place his larger hands over Izuku's. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought this up. I don't want you to worry about this. It's just a theory. After all, I could be completely wrong and he might have nothing to do with the League of Villains." Izuku is still uneasy. "But if you're right, then I'll just have to defeat him again," All Might says, then gives him a forced smile. "Don't trouble yourself with this, my boy. Focus on your studies and training your quirk." He puts a hand on his head, but doesn't ruffle his curls. Blue eyes gaze at him earnestly. "And thank you for helping me with Night-Eye." He huffs fondly, "You're giving me back everything that I had lost." Izuku can't help but smile slightly. He knows All Might is just trying to brush this off. If what he said is true, then Izuku would be in danger. However, if this villain is still weakened, then he probably wouldn't dare to attack Izuku now that All Might is gaining his strength back, right? Maybe All Might is right, maybe Izuku doesn't have anything to worry about? There's certainly nothing he can do about it now, so focusing on his studies and quirk is as good an idea as any. All Might walks him to the door and gives him one last pat on the head before sending him off. Izuku walks down the hallway, idly wondering if he'll find Kaken in the homeroom or training in the gym. He doesn't see All Might's smile drop, nor does he see him turn and walk towards the principal's office. Chapter 21. Izuku has a nightmare about staying that night. He's had a couple of them since Hazu, and they leave him sweaty and paranoid for the rest of the night. They're always about the same thing. He gets to the alley too late, he doesn't reach Ida in time, he doesn't knock Todoroki away from Stain's blade. Either way, his friends always end up dead in the end. And the horrible feeling of helplessness puts a rock in his throat and keeps him up for hours afterwards. He's always been a slow starter in the mornings, but even Kaken casts him a concerned glance as they walk to school. Izuku does his best to push through his fatigue and get excited for the new day. He cheers with his classmates when Aizawa tells them about the training camp during summer break. Their teacher warns them that those who fail to pass the end-of-term test will be stuck in remedial school. This makes Izuku wonder if Recovery Girl will give him a final exam too. He finds out later that she does, in fact, intend to give him some sort of test. When he asks more about it, though, all she tells him is to keep studying and training. Which is annoying. He's fine with studying, but he hates not knowing what to study for. Leaving him in the dark is a surefire way of giving him anxiety. At least he's able to make some progress with his quirk over the next few days. By the end of the week, he's able to sort of slow the output of energy. It takes an immense amount of concentration just to barely make a dent in his metaphorical hose, but Recovery Girl says that the rate he heals wounds has slowed by at least 10%. So, that's something. He's still nowhere near being able to make his quirk stop, but he'll take what he can get. On Friday, his usual morning check-in with his mentor is interrupted by Shinsu walking into the infirmary. Izuku startles, surprised to see the tall purple-haired boy who he hasn't spoken to since before the sports festival. He's even more surprised to see him covered in bruises. He opens his mouth to speak, but Recovery Girl beats him to it. "Are you kidding me? You were here nearly every day last week." She huffs irritably and ushers him towards the bed. "I'm going to be having a serious chat with Aizawa-san after this." Shinsu winces and sits down. "Sorry." Izuku blinks in confusion, glancing between the boy and his mentor. What?" Shinsu glances at him and explains, "I did my internship week with Aizawa-sensei. He approached me after the sports festival and offered to train me." "Oh." Izuku is a bit taken aback, but happy. "That's great. I'm assuming you're still training with him, though?" "Yeah," Shinsu says, watching him carefully. "He's gonna help me transfer into the hero course." "Well, that's not going to happen if he keeps beating you black and blue, like this," Recovery Girl says snippily, then turns towards her apprentice. "Midoriya-kun, if you would." She gestures to Shinsu. Getting the message, Izuku hesitantly approaches the other boy. He's a bit nervous. He's only ever talked to Shinsu once before, and it wasn't a very friendly encounter on Shinsu's part. He seems different now, though. Still tired and devoid of emotion, but his indigo eyes hold less of a hard edge to them than last time. Izuku's skin still prickles as they watch him closely. Ducking his head, he gently places a hand on Shinsu's forearm and concentrates on controlling his quirk. He thinks he manages to squeeze the hose a bit tighter this time, healing Shinsu's bruises more slowly than usual. Shinsu lets out a sigh of relief when he's done. "Thanks," he says. Then he pauses, seemingly hesitating, before he adds, "By the way, before the sports festival, what I said to you." He rubs the back of his neck and glances away. "Sorry," he coughs awkwardly, "I was frustrated and it was kind of a dick move." "So?" Izuku perks up, pleasantly surprised by his apology. Maybe he's like Todoroki? Aloof and intimidating on the outside, but secretly just dorky and socially awkward? Either way, Izuku is grateful that he's trying to ease the tension. "It's okay," he says, then pauses. "Well, no, it wasn't, but I accept your apology." He gives him a bright smile. Shinsu squints slightly before glancing away again with a huff. I gotta admit, you've got some damn protective classmates, he says. Teacher too. You didn't see him interrupt that mess in the hallway before the festival. First lesson I got from him was on the importance of healers. As if your classmates hadn't done a good enough job with that. He grumbles the last part. Izuku flushes at this. Sorry. He's alright. Shinsu shrugs. Guess I deserved it. I'm glad you're getting a second chance, though. Izuku says, I'm sure you'll make a great hero. Shinsu's eyes sharpen, slightly. You don't even know what my quirk is. His voice has a tone that Izuku can't decipher, but he suddenly feels like he's being tested. Swallowing, he asks warily, what is it? Brainwashing, Shinsu says. I can control the mind of anyone who verbally responds to me and make them do whatever I say. He looks down at Izuku through hooded eyes as he says this. He sounds proud of his quirk. No, not proud. There's something else in his voice, almost like he's trying to scare Izuku. And sure, brainwashing is kind of a scary quirk, but all Izuku can think now is how cool it is. That's awesome! He exclaims, what a useful quirk. It's perfect for hero work. You can take villains down just by talking to them? Man, you'd be a godsend in hostage negotiations. He giggles, not noticing the stunned expression on Shinsu. I think I get why Aizawa-sensei has taken an interest in you. You both have emitter-type quirks and you'll probably rely on your own physical skill when it comes to fighting, right? Is that why you couldn't pass the entrance exam? He's rambling now. My friend Kaken said they had to take down robots, but I guess your quirk wouldn't work on them, right? That doesn't seem fair. It's strange that He hasn't noticed that their test is so flawed. Although maybe they have, since they do allow students to transfer into the hero course if they do well in the sports festival. Do you think? Midoriya-kun, recovery girl interrupts, rolling her eyes fondly. Izuku startles. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to ramble. He waves his hand sheepishly. Shinsu is looking at him, oddly. It's alright. Tilting his head, Izuku asks, so, are you going to join Class 1A then? We have an empty spot. I hope so, Shinsu replies, I mean, if all goes well. It will. Izuku nods resolutely. Aizawa-sensei's a great teacher. You'll be ready for the hero course in no time. On a whim, he adds, and if you ever need a sparring partner, I'd be willing to help out. That seems to surprise Shinsu. He raises an eyebrow. You want to spar with me? Izuku, of course, knows exactly what's going through his mind. I may be a healer, but can certainly handle myself in a fight. Just ask Todoroki-kun. Sure, he won the sports festival, but I totally knocked him on his ass during our first sparring class. He grins triumphantly, lifting his clenched fists. Shinsu looks like he doesn't quite know what to make of him, but his lips twitch upwards when he huffs. Alright, then, I'll consider it. The warning bell rings and he gets up. Thanks for healing me. I'll try not to show up as often. Please, recovery girl says as he leaves. Izuku is sure that he does try, but knowing how merciless of a teacher Aizawa can be, he's not at all surprised when Shinsu shows up at the door at the end of his after-school lesson with recovery girl later that day, freshly covered in scrapes and bruises. Izuku sighs and steps aside, letting him in. Is this going to be a common thing? Probably. One day during the next week, Izuku is walking down the hallway after school, having just finished his lesson with recovery girl. It was a shorter lesson today, only about half as long as usual because his mentor had to leave early to attend some board meeting. He isn't quite sure what to do with himself now. A lot of his classmates, Kaken included, have taken to training after school, no doubt wanting to be as ready as they can be for the physical portion of their final exams. He doesn't want to disturb Kaken, so he finds himself making his way over to Gym Gamma, hoping to get in some of his own training. He peeks his head through the door to see if it's empty. It's not. The first thing he notices is that Shinsu and Aizawa are sparring together. The second thing he notices is that Shinsu is getting his ass handed to him. Izuku winces as the purple-haired boy's chest hits the mat with a loud thud, Aizawa keeping him pinned with his arm twisted behind his back. All right, you got me. Shinsu gripes. Aizawa lets go and Shinsu rolls onto his back, panting heavily. Can't we work on the capture weapon now? I told you, Aizawa replies, sounding bored, I'm not teaching you how to use a capture weapon until you can hold your own in a fight. Grumbling, Shinsu gets to his feet. We've been at this for 2 weeks. It's gonna take me ages before I can beat you. Aizawa's lip twitches. You don't have to beat me, you just have to hold your own. Quit trying to rush things, you've already been making good progress. So let's suddenly, his eyes dart up to meet Izuku's. The greenet stifles a squeak and pulls his head back behind the door, but it's too late. Midoriya-kun. Come over here. Swallowing, Izuku accepts his fate and sidles into the gym, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. Sorry sensei, I didn't mean to be nosy. I just wanted to see if the gym was being used. Did you want to train too? Aizawa arches a brow as Izuku steps onto the mat. When the boy nods, he jerks his head towards Shinsu. Good. Spar with him. Huh? Both Izuku and Shinsu simultaneously say. Aizawa is already stepping off the mat. It'll be easier for me to see your mistakes and fix them if I'm watching from the sidelines. Plus, it's good to have a variety of sparring partners. Fighting a short person is different from fighting a tall person. Izuku pouts. I'm not that short, he grumbles under his breath. Shinsu makes a noise that sounds suspiciously like a snort. Well? Aizawa says, gazing at them expectantly. The two boys glance at each other. Shinsu shrugs, and Izuku quickly takes off his jacket and tie before dropping into a fighting stance. Shinsu does so too, eyeing him up and down before making the first move. He swings far too wide with his right fist and Izuku easily dodges, darting in to land a quick hit to his ribs before stepping back. He could aim a kick at his knees, but he wants to give Shinsu a chance to fight back before he takes him down. The purple-haired boy briefly looks surprised before turning to attack him again. Izuku dodges the next few punches, getting in a few light hits of his own, but mostly just being quick on his feet. He can see Shinsu's problems. He has lanky limbs that would be difficult to dodge if he didn't take up so much time with his attacks. He needs to keep everything more condensed, keep his limbs close to his body before darting out with quick strikes. Shinsu is starting to get frustrated with Izuku practically dancing around him. In the corner of his eye, the greenet can see Aizawa looking a bit irritated as he follows him with his gaze, probably annoyed with how long he's prolonging the fight for, so he decides to end it. In a swift movement, he sweeps Shinsu's legs out from under him before pinning him down with his weight. Damn it, Shinsu growls. Izuku keeps him pinned, hearing Aizawa walk towards them. Midoriya-kun, the teacher drawls, can you tell Shinsu-kun what he did wrong? Izuku glances at him briefly before looking back at Shinsu, who is wearing a very disgruntled expression. He swung too wide and he wasn't fast enough. It made all of his moves easy to see and easy to dodge. You should keep your limbs closer to your body. Don't be so loose, but also don't be too tight. The last part comes out sounding like a question. He glances at Aizawa for affirmation and the man nods. Now, Shinsu-kun, he says, what did Midoriya-kun do wrong? Shinsu blinks, clearly not knowing what to say. Let me rephrase that. Aizawa sends a very pointed glance at Izuku. What is a weakness that a smaller opponent might have? Izuku wrinkles his nose childishly while Shinsu ponders. After a moment, he wiggles his arm free, grabbing Izuku by the shoulder and pushing him to the side. Izuku squeaks as Shinsu rolls them over and pins him down. He's light, Shinsu says, grinning down at him triumphantly. Izuku sticks his tongue out at him. Exactly. Aizawa looks at Izuku. If you need to pin someone, don't use your weight like that. You should twist their arm into a difficult position or something like that. Izuku nods. Shinsu lets him up after a moment and says, "You're really good, though. Where'd you learn that stuff?" "Oh, I've been taking self-defense classes for a while now," Izuku says, the words feeling rather repetitive as he reaches up to fix his ponytail. He feels like he's told a lot of people that recently. A spark of warmth tickles his heart. "I guess that means I'm making a lot of new friends," he thinks with a small smile. "What about you?" he asks. "Did you just start learning how to fight during your internship week?" Shinsu nods. "You're doing pretty good so far. I'm sure. Aizawa-sensei is a fearsome opponent." He flashes Aizawa a cheeky grin and the man just huffs. "He kicks my ass every time," Shinsu complains. "But once I get better, he'll be teaching me how to use a capture weapon." "Once you get better," Aizawa says pointedly. Shinsu sighs dramatically, making Izuku chuckle. Smoothing out his curls, he says, "That reminds me, I need to find myself a weapon to train with. Recovery Girl said that it's important for healers to have one, but I'm having trouble thinking of what to get." He tilts his head thoughtfully. "It needs to be something light, something that I can carry with me and that won't get in the way of my costume." Shinsu and Aizawa share a glance over his head. "Sounds like a capture weapon," Shinsu says. Izuku pauses and frowns. "Why would I need to capture someone?" "You don't need to use it for capture," Aizawa says. "You saw me fighting at USJ. It's good for keeping villains at a distance, and it won't weigh you down much." Shinsu pipes up, "Plus, it can double as gauze if you run out." Izuku and Aizawa glance at him. "What? It could?" Izuku eyes the scarf around Aizawa's neck and considers it. "I guess it's not a bad idea. Course, it won't be easy to learn to use one," the teacher sniffs. "It took me 6 years before I could properly use mine." When Izuku's eyes widen, he adds, "But then again, I didn't have someone to teach me." "You could join Shinsu-kun's lessons and learn alongside him." Shinsu gives him a Cheshire-like grin. "Yeah, come suffer with me." Aizawa gives him a sharp look that would make Izuku cower if it was directed at him, but Shinsu just smiles at him innocently. I would love to," Izuku says, "but I already have my after-school lessons with Recovery Girl." Aizawa idly scratches his scruffy cheek. "I'll talk to her," he grunts, "see if we can work something out. If she really believes it's important, then she'll probably be fine with me stealing some of her time with you." The raven-haired man looks down at him. "So, what do you say?" Izuku smiles eagerly. "Sure." After some discussion, they end up working out a schedule with Recovery Girl. Izuku will train with Aizawa and Shinsu on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school. Since their lessons often run longer than the hour Izuku spends with Recovery Girl, he'll spend the first half hour with her to at least go over the day's patients and maybe heal a couple of people before joining Aizawa's lesson halfway through. It's difficult to fit yet another thing into his already busy schedule, but it's worth it. Training with Shinsu is great. He's not nearly as good of a fighter as Izuku, but he's a fast learner and is willing to push forward even when he's tired. It's easier for Aizawa to fix his mistakes when he's watching him spar with Izuku rather than himself, so they start to make more rapid progress. Shinsu is surprisingly fun to hang out with too. He has an incredibly dry and sarcastic sense of humor that throws Izuku off at first, but it's not long before he's inviting the boy to sit with him at lunch. Shinsu doesn't take him up on the offer until a week later. Then, it's as if he's been a part of the group for ages. Izuku's friends minus Kaken are more than happy to welcome him in, especially after learning he might join their class soon. Izuku figures it's better for Shinsu to start befriending his future classmates sooner rather than later. Meanwhile, their afternoon hero classes have steadily been getting more and more difficult. All Might seems to be focusing on their ability to maneuver around quickly in all sorts of environments. They haven't done much direct combat, which Izuku is grateful for, but it looks like that's about to change soon. During one class in the middle of June, All Might pulls Izuku aside once he's gotten changed into his healer costume. "You are going to be doing something a little different than the rest of your classmates," All Might says. Izuku winces. "Let me guess, they're doing more combat training?" All Might's smile turns into something more mischievous and secretive. "Something like that." Izuku starts to get nervous. All Might has him stay by his side until everyone has gathered around him. Kaken arches an eyebrow at Izuku, who just shrugs cluelessly. He jumps in surprise when All Might plops a large hand on his shoulder and grins. "You may be wondering why we've come here today." All Might's voice booms as he gestures to the buildings of Ground Beta. "Well, today's training will entail a bit of roleplay." Izuku is bewildered as to why he sounds so excited. Unsurprisingly, Kaminari, ever the unmature one, snickers at this. All Might continues, oblivious. "You all, of course, will be the heroes. I, however, will be your villain." And young Midoriya Izuku lets out a surprised squeal as two muscled arms suddenly wrap around his torso and lift him up. "All Might will be my hostage," All Might declares. The students tense up, bracing themselves for a fight. All Might's eyes flash. "You have 40 minutes to rescue him." The hero squats down before leaping into the air. Izuku shrieks and clutches his arms for dear life, but All Might holds him to his chest securely. They land on top of a building with a heavy thump. "I'm bait?" Izuku exclaims. "No, you're a hostage," All Might says patiently, "and I'm a villain." This is a great training exercise for these young heroes. Plus he shifts his grip. This is exciting. I never get to be the villain. Izuku can't see the man's face, but he can practically hear the eager grin in his voice. Seriously? Why does he have to be the hostage? Well, he does suppose he wouldn't have much of a part to play in rescue training, as a healer. With a huffy little sigh, he begrudgingly lets himself go limp. So much for his own training. Mere seconds after they land on the roof, the sounds of explosions erupt from the street below. Kaken rockets over to them, a snarl on his face. "Give him back, you fucker." All Might shifts Izuku over to one arm and flicks his fingers with his free hand, creating a blast of air that knocks Kaken backwards. A moment later, Todoroki appears, having bolstered himself up with an iceberg. He makes to attack, but All Might grabs Izuku's head in his massive hand. All Might warns, "I'm a villain now, remember? I can hurt my hostage at any moment." Todoroki freezes. Izuku does too, even though they both know All Might won't actually hurt him. But this is way too similar to his situation with Stain. Izuku can see it in Todoroki's eyes. They look the same as they did back then. Angry and frustrated, but ultimately fearful. He stands down. Kaken recovers from the attack and blasts his way onto the roof. He lunges at All Might, but Todoroki stops him with a block of ice. "Wait. What the fuck are you doing, half and half?" Kaken snarls, whirling on him. As he does, other students finally reach the rooftop too. Sero swings himself and Kaminari up with his tape. Yaozu makes a grappling hook for herself, and Uraraka makes herself and a few others float while Asui swings them over with her tongue. They circle around All Might, who tightens his hold on Izuku. "Fighting villains is different when they have a hostage," he says. "Everything you do will have a direct effect on the hostage. Attack carelessly and I could use young Midoriya as a human shield." He gives a pointed look to Kaken, who sees. "Your job is to save him without getting him hurt. How will you do that?" "Well, I think the answer should be obvious." With that said, he takes off into the air again, this time landing on the ground. The next half hour goes by very slowly. Every time the students circle around All Might, he moves again. Just catching up to him eats up a lot of time. And when they do, they struggle to figure out how to take him on without hurting Izuku. It's difficult and frustrating for his classmates, but Izuku just finds himself getting kind of bored. "You know," Izuku says when they're alone, "if Shinsu-kun was here, this fight would be over in 2 seconds." Is that the boy you're training with now? All Might asks, flicking another stream of air at Kaken when the blonde rounds the corner. Aizawa-san's apprentice? Yeah, you'd love him, Izuku says. He's like Aizawa-sensei but sassier. Oh lord. All Might jumps out of the way when the ground beneath him freezes. You'll have to try harder than that, you zygotes. Mwahahaha. His chest vibrates with the booming laugh. He's really having way too much fun with this. Izuku, in a very deadpan voice, says, We're coming, Midoriya-kun. Hagakure's voice cries out from somewhere. Hang in there, buddy. We'll save you. Cool. Izuku sniffs, flashing a thumbs up to no one in particular. The clock ticks by as All Might continues to get chased around. Then, all of the sudden, everyone seems to disappear. All Might glances around at the empty street, standing just outside of some sort of parking garage. Oh heroes, where are you? He calls out. Don't tell me you left young Midoriya to fend for himself. Izuku is kind of tempted to bite him. Something hits the ground behind them and All Might whirls around just as the object explodes, a cloud of smoke bursting out. A smoke screen? All Might questions, jumping backwards to avoid it. However, that means that now they're inside the parking garage, shrouded in the dim light. Just as Izuku realizes what's about to happen, he hears dark shadows roar. Another smoke bomb goes off, this one unavoidable in the tight quarters. Izuku can't see anything anymore, but he can hear multiple battle cries from his classmates, as well as the sound of Todoroki's eyes freezing over something. A mass of darkness swirls around them and All Might's arms suddenly loosen their grip slightly. As soon as they do, Izuku feels a long slimy tongue wrap around his torso and yank him away. He isn't quite sure what happens then. He feels a lot of hands moving him around, and the next thing he knows he's out in the blinding sunlight once more. It takes him a moment to realize that Ida is carrying him away from the parking garage, where sounds of fighting erupt. Midoriya-kun. Ida looks down at him worriedly. Are you alright? Izuku blinks up at him, noticing that he's being carried bridal style. Yeah. A bit confused, but not so fast, young Ida. All Might is suddenly running beside them. Before Ida can even react, All Might knocks him aside and grabs Izuku once more. The rest of his classmates are desperately dashing over from the garage. Not a bad plan. All Might says as they circle around him. Izuku is really getting quite tired of being carried like this. All Might's arms are wrapped around his torso, leaving his legs dangling awkwardly. Wait a minute. I'm glad you realized that teamwork is the key to dealing with hostage situations, All Might says. Unfortunately, your realization has come a bit too late. Your time is almost up, so Izuku kicks him in the balls. All Might's grip slackens, and Izuku proceeds to sink his teeth into his arm and clamp down until the man drops him. Then, he makes a mad dash while his classmates surge past him, now having free rein to attack All Might all at once. He almost pities the man when he hears the utterly furious screech that Kaken lets out, followed by a booming explosion. Midoriya. Something bumps into him and then he's been swept off his feet again. The wind whips past them as Todoroki swiftly glides across the ground on his ice, carrying Izuku bridal style. And as thrilled as Izuku is to be in his arms rather than All Might's, he's kind of done with being passed around. Are you alright? Todoroki asks. Why would he not be? It's not like All Might was actually going to hurt him. Yeah, I'm fine, he says, thanks. There's a particularly loud yell behind them and Todoroki glances over his shoulder. Incoming! Someone shouts. Todoroki skids to a half briefly and stomps his foot on the ground, creating a massive glacier like the one from the sports festival. All Might must have been chasing them, but the sounds of fighting continue on a moment later, now muffled by the ice. Todoroki whirls around and continues sliding, only to suddenly take a sharp left and swerve into a building. Izuku isn't quite sure where he's taking him. Todoroki kicks open a door and finally puts Izuku down. shoving him forward into the dark room before following him, and wow, that's a tight fit. He shuts the door and makes a wall of ice as an additional barrier, leaving them with even less space. Izuku wiggles uncomfortably, stuck between Todoroki's chest and something else. Todoroki-kun? There's a click and a light above them, turns on, dim and occasionally flickering. Izuku blinks and struggles to glance around. A closet? He won't expect us to hide in here, Todoroki explains, panting heavily from his ordeal. He thinks we're still running. We can hide here until the time runs out. It shouldn't be long. Oh. Izuku hopes it won't be long. It's dusty and cramped in here. Silence falls between them and Izuku tries to figure out what to say. Funny how this is the lesson we're learning, right? I mean, crap, why'd he say that? Izuku can't really see Todoroki's face from where he's pressed against him, but he can feel him shift. It's like we were back in that alley, he says lowly. Izuku tries to reassure him. You know, All Might wouldn't have hurt me. I know, it's just. Todoroki sighs, and Izuku can feel his breath disturb the curls on the top of his head. I couldn't do anything alone, Izuku points out. Even working together, we couldn't really do anything. Todoroki pauses, then huffs a bit more lightly. I can't believe you kicked him in the balls. Izuku smiles against his costume. It'll become one of my most treasured memories. A little snort of laughter escapes Todoroki. Shocked, Izuku pulls back enough to look at his face. Even Todoroki seems mildly surprised. Izuku's smile grows. I don't think I've ever heard you laugh before, Todoroki-kun. He lets out a giggle of his own. I like it. Todoroki stares down at him. For some reason, his face is starting to look a bit flushed. Thanks to their small hiding spot, their faces are very close, together. Izuku's neck is starting to cramp from looking up at Todoroki, so he moves to rest his chin on the boy's shoulder. Much like during their first sparring lesson, and later during their internship week, Izuku's heart starts beating rapidly in response to Todoroki's close proximity. Thankfully, he doesn't feel as dizzy or breathless as he did during those times. He kind of likes it, actually. It's like his insides are all fuzzy and warm. Kind of like how he feels on the rare occasions gets to snuggle with Kaken, except there's something else to it. Todoroki's heart is beating rapidly against his chest too. Izuku sniffs, noticing an odd burning smell slowly growing stronger. The fabric under his chin is starting to grow warm too. His eyes fly open. Todoroki-kun. He yelps, jumping backwards, only to grunt when he bumps into a shelf. You're burning. Izuku can't really get away from the other boy, but Todoroki is quick to put out his flames. In fact, the room drops about 10 degrees colder. Sorry. Todoroki hastily apologizes. I didn't mean to. Izuku shivers and winces as something hard pokes his back painfully. Ow, wait, hold on. He grabs Todoroki's arm and steps between his feet, trying to get into a more comfortable position. The thing poking his back doesn't move and he shifts again, accidentally knocking something over. It clatters to the ground and he almost slips, but the other boy catches him. Stop, Todoroki grunts. Just there's something jabs the back of his thigh and he presses closer to Todoroki, trying to wiggle away from the offending object. The fabric of their costume slides together unpleasantly as Izuku keeps shifting. Suddenly, Todoroki lets out a strangled noise in his throat. Hands grab Izuku's hips and he abruptly finds himself being pressed against the shelf behind him. He groans and twists uncomfortably, but Todoroki's guttural voice makes him freeze. Stop squirming. Izuku goes still. Above him, Todoroki breathes heavily, skin flushed as he fixes him with an intense gaze. Izuku swallows. It's been a while since those mismatched eyes have made him so nervous. For a few moments, neither of them speak. Izuku is still very uncomfortable, the shelf digging into his back painfully, but he can't budge an inch with Todoroki pressed against him like this. The grip on his hips tightens when he tries to Move, a silent warning to stay still. Izuku's heart feels like it's going to beat out of his chest, and he feels so breathless that he doesn't trust himself to speak. Instead, he averts his gaze and looks down at Todoroki's chest. Then, his eyes drop even lower. Their hips are pressed against each other, Todoroki's thigh between his legs. With the way they're squashed together like this, Izuku suddenly realizes why Todoroki was so bothered by his wiggling. His face burns. He looks back up at Todoroki, ready to spout a million apologies, but he finds himself trapped by heterochromatic eyes. Todoroki stares at him silently, intensely, and Izuku feels strangely vulnerable under his magnetic gaze. He gulps. And he comes to his second realization of the day. The way his heart pounds around Todoroki, how his cheeks flush, how dizzy he gets as Izuku's breath catches in his throat. Oh shit, the buzzer goes off, signaling the end of the training exercise. As if snapped from the trance, Todoroki jerks backwards, hitting the wall of ice. It evaporates a second later and he practically falls out the door. Todoroki-kun. Izuku yelps, but the other boy catches himself before he can hit the ground. There you are. Kirishima spots them through the window and trots into the building, Kaken on his heels. Did you hide? Good thinking, Todoroki-kun. Todoroki's face is still flushed. MMMHMPH, is all he can get out. Kirishima tilts his head, concerned. Are you alright, man? You don't look so good, he says, but Todoroki is already stumbling out of the building. Hey, wait, Kaken turns to Izuku. What the fuck happened? Izuku shakes his head feverishly. He's still reeling from his realization, but he manages to squeak, nothing. Kaken's eyes narrow. He glances at Kirishima walking away with a decidedly unsteady Todoroki, then glances back at Izuku's flushed face. His eyes widen slightly. No way, he says after a beat. Izuku moans and covers his face with his hands. Kaken is silent for a moment. Then, he snorts. Oh, shut up. Izuku cries, punching his friend on the shoulder as he bursts out laughing. It's not funny. You should haha see your face. You're the worst. The next few days are kind of awkward between him and Todoroki. They still sit with each other at lunch, of course, and it's not like they're actively avoiding each other. It's just a little weird. Tense, perhaps. But as Izuku snuggles with Sushi in his bed later one night, trying to calm his racing heart as he thinks about Todoroki, he comes to think, what does it matter? Yes, he can admit that he thinks Todoroki is pretty. But a lot of people think that. Ashido said that basically all the girls think he's the most handsome boy in class. Izuku is perfectly fine, acknowledging his friend's attractiveness. And as for all the physical reactions he has to the boy, well, he figures that could just be attributed to hormones. He knows the human body better than any of his classmates, so he knows that he's not excluded from the variety of raging hormones that go on in a 15-year-old's body. It makes sense, he supposes. He likes Todoroki, they're good friends, and maybe that coupled with his newfound appreciation for Todoroki's beauty has given his body and mind all sorts of weird signals. It's a perfectly logical explanation. He doesn't have to worry, nothing has to change. And nothing has to be done about it. So, despite the fact that he now blushes whenever Todoroki looks at him a certain way, and that Kaken, and Kirishima, because Kaken told him, the traitor, has a shit-eating grin whenever he's in the same room as the bicolored boy, life continues on as normal. Or, as normal as life and I can be. On more than one occasion, Izuku spots All Might talking to Mirio. He wonders how things are going on that end, if All Might has decided to make Mirio his successor. He doesn't want to be nosy, though, and he figures All Might would probably come to him about any big developments anyway, so he lets it go. In regards to training, he's having varying amounts of success. Aizawa has just started teaching him and Shinsu how to use a capture weapon. Neither of them are very good at it, but Izuku tries not to get frustrated. considering that they just started learning. He also finds that it's easier to fail when you have someone else to fail with you. His quirk, on the other hand, is showing more improvement. He's able to slow the flow of energy by 50% now. His progress excites him, but he doesn't forget about one of the things Kami taught him that he's wanted to try. Currently, it's 4 p.m. in the afternoon, 2 weeks before finals, and Izuku is tending to Monoma's wounds. The boy has a nasty cut on his leg that normally wouldn't be too difficult to heal, except there's also an annoying amount of gravel stuck in it that Izuku has to pick out first. Meanwhile, Monoma is complaining very loudly at how unfairly Vlad King treated him during whatever exercise class 1B was doing. He just doesn't see my potential as a leader, Monoma sniffs disdainfully. Instead, he chose that hothead Kamakiri-kun, and his crazy tactics got us trampled by the beast. Beast? Izuku questions idly, removing a piece of gravel with some tweezers. Monoma waves his hand dismissively. Shishida-kun has a quirk that turns him into a big hairy beast. He's strong, but he goes a little wild sometimes. That must have been scary, Izuku says a bit condescendingly, but it gets the reaction he's looking for. Monoma blinks at him, looking mildly surprised before he tilts his chin away with a smirk. Nah, he's alright. I've dealt with scarier things than him. It's clearly bait, but Izuku takes it. Like what? Monoma's eyes flash eagerly and he launches into a very dramatic tale of the time he protected his younger brother from not one, but 2 villains. It's clearly exaggerated and unrealistic, and about halfway through Izuku realizes that the villains were most likely just some neighborhood bullies. However, Izuku still acts like he's fascinated with the story, nodding along excitedly and gasping at all the right times. Monoma preens under the attention, but more importantly, he doesn't give Izuku any trouble as he picks the gravel out of his wound. And, well, that's just the kind of guy I am, Monoma finishes, feigning nonchalance. That's really cool, Monoma-kun. Izuku looks up briefly to smile warmly at him. Monoma's chest puffs up just a little more. Man, Class 1A must not be as impressive as they think they are. He snorts, if you're impressed by a side character like me. What starts out as a typical arrogant statement abruptly turns into something surprisingly self-deprecating. Taken aback, Izuku asks, huh? What do you mean by side character? You know, Monoma says, turning up his nose, those people with flashy quirks like your friends outshine the rest of us. I'm not ignorant, I know my quirk can't even begin to compete with theirs when it comes to who's gonna steal the spotlight. Your class is full of main characters, surely you must see that. Izuku blinks, dumbfounded. What? Monoma looks at him like he's questioning his intelligence. Your class is full of main characters, he explains slowly. They get to be born with perfect quirks that basically guarantee their success so long as they have half a brain, and because their quirks are so perfect and flashy everyone pays attention to them. But not everyone gets to have a flashy quirk. Take your homeroom teacher for example. Sure, people like us can still become heroes, but in a society like this we're always destined to be side characters. Izuku is honestly shocked. Monoma is always so narcissistic and arrogant, he never thought the boy would think so little of himself. His voice has a bitter edge to it, but ultimately he looks rather resigned, like he's already accepted this a long time ago. It makes something pull uncomfortably in Izuku's chest. Looking back down at Monoma's injury, Izuku silently keeps on working. Monoma is quiet too. The pull in Izuku's chest grows stronger. He doesn't pause in his ministrations or take his eyes off of the wound as he hesitantly says, you know, I wanted to be a hero. He can feel Monoma's eyes snap to him, but he continues softly, and I think a part of me always will. Even though I have this amazing healing quirk, it's hard not being able to do what you want because of what you were born with. But even though this isn't the quirk I wanted, I still love it very much. He glances at Monoma briefly. Even though your quirk isn't as flashy as you would like, even if it might not ever get you into the spotlight. You should always respect the gift you were born with. You can do things that other people can't. You can save people in ways that other people can't. So, I guess. He removes the last piece of gravel and straightens up. Monome gazes at him with an indecipherable expression and Izuku gives him a weary smile. We just have to do the best we can with what we're given. After a moment, he adds, and for what it's worth, I think you could be a main character. You might have to work a bit harder than everyone else, but you shouldn't give up and settle for being a side character. Monome stares at him. Then, his lips quirk up into a smirk. Who said I was giving up? He says, arching a brow. Izuku smiles and ducks his head, moving his hand over the boy's leg to heal him. There you go, all better. Tell Shishida-kun to be more careful next time. Sure. Monome drawls, sliding off the bed. After testing his weight on his newly healed leg, he walks over to the door. He pauses, then glances at Izuku over his shoulder. A smirk still plays on his lips. Thanks. Izuku watches him leave, chest feeling warm. Maybe Monome's not so bad after all. The next couple of days go by rather uneventfully. Izuku finds himself becoming a bit stressed as finals approach. Between school, training with Recovery Girl, training with Aizawa, regular homework and Recovery Girl's homework, he hardly has any time for himself. It doesn't help that he doesn't know what to study for Recovery Girl's exam. Needless to say, his anxiety is having a blast. When he walks into the infirmary for his after-school lesson, he's surprised to see Mirio there with All Might, who's in his normal form. Both blondes give him blinding grins when they see him. Izuku squints. Hello, young Midoriya. Hi. Izuku smiles and walks in, ducking All Might's hand when he reaches out to ruffle his curls. He doesn't manage to avoid the arm Mirio plops around his shoulders, but at least he leaves his hair alone. How's your day been, Midoriya-kun? Mirio beams at him. Flushing slightly, Izuku averts his gaze and says, it's been fine, I guess. What are you doing here? I broke my toe. Mirio says with flourish, lifting up his foot to display said broken toe. Izuku stifles a sigh. Your quirk makes you untouchable. How on earth do you keep breaking things? I've been wondering that for the past 3 years. Recovery Girl doesn't even bother to look up from her computer. I've already said it, though, so all you need to do is heal it. Izuku looks up at All Might. And you? The man shakes his head, blonde tufts swaying. Oh, I'm fine. I just escorted young Tagata here. I'll get out of your way. To Mirio, he says, meet me at the gate once you're done. Before he leaves, he manages to get his hand on Izuku's head before the green-up can duck, ruffling his hair and then leaving while Izuku whines in protest. What is it with people messing up my hair all the time? He gripes, fixing his long curls. It's very ruffleable, Mirio says decisively. I ought to cut it short, Izuku grumbles under his breath. It will still be very ruffleable. Izuku sighs and Mirio snickers. Bending down, he takes Mirio's foot in his hand and casually asks, so how are things between you and All Might going, then? Huh? Mirio blinks at him, stunned. He glances up at the door where All Might left, then back at Izuku. The freckled boy simply arches a brow, and his eyes widen comically. You know? Of course I know. Who do you think healed him? Izuku finds the expression on Mirio's face very amusing right now. Recovery Girl knows too. Oh, good. Mirio lets out a huge sigh of relief. I'm glad there's at least some other people I can talk to about One for All. Izuku blinks. I mean, I still can't believe All Might offered it to me. And Sir Night-Eye has been getting me ready for this without me even knowing? How crazy is that? I mean, of course I'm grateful for it now, considering what he told me about One for All, but wait, Izuku interrupts, frowning in confusion. I'm totally lost. What the heck is One for All? Mirio freezes, looking like a deer caught in headlights. Recovery girl sighs very loudly from her desk. Never underestimate the stupidity of heroes, she mutters under her breath as she gets up and moves over to the door, poking her head into the hallway. Toshinori-kun. She calls out, "Come back here." Izuku glances between her and Mirio, who blanches, his expression morphing into one of utter dismay. As soon as All Might steps through the door, he blurts, "I'm so sorry, I thought he knew." "Knew about what?" Izuku asks, turning to All Might. "What's one for all? And why are you giving it to Mirio-senpai?" All Might stares at him. Then, he lets out a world-weary sigh and reaches behind him to lock the door. Izuku frowns. "Don't worry," All Might says to a very guilty-looking Mirio. "I was going to tell him eventually." "Tell me what?" Izuku presses, frustration rising in his chest. "What's going on here?" Mirio looks like he just accidentally ran over someone's dog, All Might looks like he's resigned himself to some unknown fate, and Recovery Girl looks like she's just done with all of their bullshit, which, well, that's not an unusual look for her. But they all clearly know something that he doesn't, so of course he can't help being curious about what it is. And he won't admit this out loud, but a small, teeny-tiny part of him is just a little bit offended that he was left out of this secret. All Might and Mirio share a look that Izuku doesn't understand, and then the number one hero turns to him, wordlessly gesturing to his desk chair. The greenette reluctantly goes over and sits down, All Might doing the same on a spare stool a couple feet away from him. Mirio takes a step back to give them some space but stays standing, and Izuku pretends not to notice the way he's watching his mentor with thinly veiled anxiousness in his eyes. Looking at All Might, Izuku doesn't ask again, but gazes at him imploringly. The man presses his lips together for a moment, then says, "To answer your question, what's one for all? It is my quirk." "That's what it's called." Izuku blinks in surprise. All Might's quirk? That's not what he was expecting. Such a strange name for a quirk like his. Why one for all? All Might's immensely powerful quirk is something that has been speculated on for many years, but wait a minute, Mirio said that All Might offered one for all to him. Izuku's brows furrow, but before he can open his mouth to ask anything, All Might continues, "One for all is a very special quirk, the true nature of it being a very tightly kept secret, known to only a few select people. The tabloids called it superhuman strength and a boost, and I always dodge the question during interviews with a funny joke. Because the symbol of peace, All Might, had to be a natural-born hero." And the way he says that, the expression on his face, makes Izuku's heart skip a beat. What is he saying? Is he not a natural-born hero? That's impossible, he's All Might. But the steadfast look in All Might's eyes chases away any thoughts that he might be lying, and the confirmation comes a moment later. "But, young Midoriya, that is not the case," he says in a severe, but not bitter, tone. Then he straightens up slightly and spreads his arms, declaring, "My quirk was passed on to me like a sacred torch. It is the ability to transfer power from one individual to another. One person cultivates the power and passes it on to another person who also cultivates it and passes it on. That is the power of one, for all. It is the crystallization of power that spins together the voices of those who need help with a courageous heart." He finishes his short speech with a triumphant lilt in his voice. Izuku stares at him blankly, his mind reeling. From her desk, Recovery Girl sniffs. All Might lowers his arms slowly. "So," he coughs slightly, "yes, well, that is one for all." "What?" Izuku finally manages to choke out, eyes wide. I don't know." More words follow and his mouth is just left hanging open for a few moments before he closes it, frustration burning in his chest as his mind whirls with confusion. It sounds impossible, it has to be impossible, but then again, everything about All Might always seems to be impossible. All Might's large hand reaches to grasp his. "I was going to tell you, eventually, I swear," he says earnestly. "I've been lucky to have Chio-san in my corner for all these years. And once I pass my quirk on to young Dagata, I would like you to be by his side. Izuku startles and glances rapidly between him and Mirio. Wait, I'm sorry, this is all a bit much, I'm still a little confused, he says uncertainly. You were going to give him your one for all? All Might nods. Yes, I am. As you already know, Sir Nightai desperately wanted me to find a successor after I got injured so that I could have someone to pass one for all down to and train them to become the next symbol of peace. And even after we broke up, he still went and took young Tagata under his wing in the hopes that I would one day accept him as my successor. Izuku doesn't miss the way his eyes shine with gratitude when he talks about his old friend's dedication. Slowly processing the information, the freckled boy glances back over at Mirio. Their eyes meet, and the older boy's expression smooths out to give him one of his familiar bright, easygoing smiles. Somehow, Izuku finds a tiny bit of his anxiety slipping away just at the sight. And, you really think he's your successor? He asks, turning to look up at All Might. He doesn't mean any offense by it, of course, but if all of this really is real, then this is a super important decision. A smile forms on All Might's lips and he nods again. I do, he says, looking at Mirio. He has all the qualities I could possibly ask for. He has exceptional strength and skill, and is never one to shy away from a challenge. He has heart, and firmly stands by his values. He believes in what I also believe, that a hero is supposed to help and protect, to save the day with a smile, no matter what. All Might turns back to Izuku, eyes warm. He is my successor. And he sounds certain of it. Even though part of Izuku is still reeling from the revelation, he can't help smiling a little. He slowly looks back at Mirio, gaze roaming over his impressive physique, his blonde hair, his bright eyes. They really are so similar, in more ways than one. And Izuku knows that there's truth to All Might's words. Of course there is. Mirio could never have caught Sir Nightai's attention or won the third year's sports festival if he didn't have an immense amount of skill and determination. But far more importantly than that, Izuku knows from experience how kind and caring he can be, going out of his way to make sure his Kuhai feels comfortable and making him laugh with silly jokes that don't always make sense but are somehow funny anyways. Yeah, he'd be a perfect successor for All Might. So, he says slowly, you don't have one for all yet? No. Mirio shakes his head. We were going to wait until summer break, so in case something goes wrong, I won't be in school. Goes wrong? Izuku questions, concerned. One for all can be a bit tricky to get the hang of, at first, All Might admits a bit sheepishly. That's why Sir Nightai has been helping young Tagata get into peak physical shape so that when he does accept my quirk, his body will be able to handle it. Mirio grins and flexes his muscles with a wink. Normally, Izuku might smile or blush, but his mind is still struggling to process all this new information. This is a lot. It kind of feels like the rug has been pulled out from under him, but, admittedly, he's almost started to get used to that feeling now that he can handle this. It would have been nice if All Might had told him sooner, but he supposes he understands why he kept it a secret. But then All Might glances between him and Mirio and sighs once more. There's something else I need to tell you about, he says hesitantly, something I haven't told you about yet, young Tagata. But you deserve to know. It almost sounds like he's trying to tell himself that if you're going to accept one for all, I need you to know everything beforehand. Izuku's stomach sinks. There's more? Mirio looks confused too, his usual cheerful expression vanishing at All Might's severe tone. What do you mean? He asks. The origins of one for all, All Might replies, and then he goes on to tell them about a quirk that existed long ago, back when superpowers were just appearing, called All for One. He tells them of the man that used said quirk to steal the quirks of others and quickly gain immense power in the underworld of Japan during the chaotic period when society didn't know how to deal with the emergence of quirks. He tells them how he would force quirks onto people to make them submit to him, but that many could not bear the burden and would become like living dolls who could not speak, just like the Namas. Izuku's defense. Memories of the hulking beast at USJ flashing across his mind, its massive size, its immense strength, its shock absorption, its regenerating limbs. What? His quirk wasn't shock absorption? I didn't say that was all he had. Shigaraki's voice titters in his head. This is his super regeneration. Namu has been modified to take you at 100%. Beside him, Mirio's brows knit in confusion. What are you saying? All Might's expression is grim, but he continues on nonetheless, telling them about All for One's younger brother, the sickly man with a sense of justice that resisted him despite his quirklessness. He tells them how, for some unknown reason, whether it had been out of kindness or to force him into submission, All for One forced a quirk that could stock power onto his younger brother, who turned out not to be quirkless but in fact had the useless quirk that could pass on quirks. And those two mixed together created One for All. It's ironic, All Might says in a tone that sounds far too bitter for Izuku's liking, that justice always comes from evil. Wait, All Might, I understand how that came about. Mirio hastens to reassure him, but if you were worried that I would reject One for All because it was created by a villain, don't be. After all, it's not about who it was made by, but how I use it that matters. He clenches his fist with a determined look in his eyes. Izuku smiles, but when he glances back at All Might, the man doesn't look any more relieved. If anything, he looks even grimmer than before. That's not it, he says, pressing his lips together. All for One continued to live on past the age of any normal man. With a power like his, he could steal any quirk he wanted. A quirk to stop aging is my best guess. And so, with the symbol of evil being pretty much immortal, the younger brother decided to entrust his quirk to future generations in hopes that if they slowly cultivated the power, it would one day be strong enough to stop his older brother. And when it was my turn, I was finally able to defeat him. Izuku's eyes widen. His turn? All Might fought this villain from nightmares and won? How? When? Surely a fight like that would have been all over the news. Wait a minute. I asked that this fight not be made public to the world. Izuku's breath hitches as realization dawns on him. And even though All Might's words are triumphant, the grimace on his face is all the confirmation Izuku needs. At least, that's what I thought, All Might reluctantly says, but now I am unsure. There's a heavy silence in which Mirio and Izuku simply stare at him as he gazes down at his steepled fingers with a furrowed brow. Then, he speaks again. One for All is the power inherited to defeat All for One, so to say. When I saw the Namu with multiple quirks, I had a bad feeling. He grimaces. I know this villain. He moves in calculating ways, and there have been a few signs that have led me to believe that he has started moving again as the brain behind the League of Villains. Izuku's breath hitches as All Might sighs. I might still be wrong, and I might have truly defeated him. But young Tagada. He looks up at the boy with solemn eyes. I need you to know that if you inherit One for All, then you might inherit this fight too. Mirio stares at him, then gazes down at his hands silently, his brow furrowed. All Might dips his head. I completely understand. If you, I'll do it. Mirio says, surprising the man. He clenches his fists and narrows his eyes in determination. Of course I'll do it. All Might blinks, stunned. I don't want you to make this decision hastily. I'm not, Mirio says, it's not a hasty decision. I'm going to become a pro hero soon. Even without One for All, I'd be doing my best to fight this guy. He gazes at All Might earnestly, not a hint of doubt in his eyes. The older man stares at him for a moment before his lip twitches up. Young Tagada Izuku jumps to his feet, waving his hands frantically. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. He squeaks, All Might, you don't have to give it to him right now. I'm going to heal you as soon as I can. You'll be strong again, strong enough to defeat this All for One. There's no rush, young Midoriya, calm down, relax, All Might soothes, gently grabbing his hands. You misunderstand. I won't completely lose one for all once I give it to young Tagada. Izuku blinks. Oh. He sits back down, a little embarrassed, but still incredibly worried. He glances between his senpai and All Might anxiously. But I don't like this. I don't want Miru-senpai facing off against this guy. I'm more worried about you, Miru says, looking down at him. Izuku blinks in surprise. If he really did survive, then that's probably why Shigaraki has his eye on you. He's probably injured and he needs a healer, someone strong enough to heal him. He turns to All Might, eyes full of concern. Aren't you worried? Izuku opens his mouth to reply, but All Might startles him by saying, yes. After young Midoriya told me about Shigaraki's interest, I expressed my concerns to the principal. A couple of underground heroes patrol your area regularly, so he asked them to keep an eye on you on your way home. He says the last part to Izuku. The Greenet doesn't think this day can get any weirder. What? He exclaims, mind whirling. That's good, Mirio says, relaxing slightly and acting as if he can't hear Izuku's brain running a mile a minute. So, what now? Now, you think about this, All Might says, standing up. He gives Mirio a firm look. I know you're young and eager to fight, but please, give this some more thought before you make your decision. Pressing his lips together, Mirio nods. And you? All Might turns to Izuku and places a hand on his head. For once, Izuku doesn't push it off. Focus on your studies, and focus on your quirk. We can discuss one for all more later, but I don't want you to concern yourself with what villains might be thinking or doing. Like I said, I might be wrong and All for One might not be out there. But there's nothing to be done about it right now. Okay? Izuku's mind feels scrambled from this sudden onslaught of information. He nods numbly. Okay. All Might gives his head a small pat, nods politely at Recovery Girl, and leaves. Silence fills the room. Slowly, he turns to look at Mirio. His senpai looks back at him, bright blue eyes roaming over his face with a tinge of concern. Then, he smiles softly. Izuku doesn't resist as he reaches out and gently pulls him to his chest, tucking his head under his chin and rubbing his back soothingly. Izuku slowly lets out a long exhale and nuzzles closer. My brain hurts, he mumbles against his senpai's shirt. Mirio chuckles softly. Chapter 22. On the Monday before finals week, Izuku finally manages to completely stop his quirk. It takes an incredible amount of concentration and he almost feels physically tired afterwards, but he succeeds. He shuts off his quirk halfway through healing a burn on a student's arm and promptly shrieks with happiness, much to the student's confusion. He finds Nejire as soon as he can and thanks her profusely while she whoops and glomps him. His friends cheer when he tells them during class the next day and All Might congratulates him. Even Aizawa gives him an encouraging nod. Recovery Girl is pleased too. Good job, Midoriya-kun, she says, I'm incredibly proud of you for working so hard to accomplish this. He beams and tries not to blush. I wanted to wait until you were at least in your third semester. But I know how eager you are to get your license. He perks up, hope flaring in his chest. I think, and I can't make any promises, but I think I can pull some strings and have you do the license exam in the beginning of your second semester. Before he can get too excited, Recovery Girl adds, it's going to be a provisional license, so there will be many restrictions, understand? You still probably won't be able to heal anyone without supervision, and you absolutely won't be able to do surgeries or anything like that, not that I've even taught you that. But? Izuku prompts, green eyes practically sparkling. Recovery Girl gives him a chiding look and smiles. But you will be allowed to heal pro heroes under supervision. Yes. He shouts, punching the air with his fist. Yes, yes, yes. We will keep on training you to control your quirk, his mentor says over his cheers, and you will go slow if you heal Toshinori-kun. I don't care if it takes days or even weeks. I do not want you draining yourself for that man. And he won't appreciate it either if you pass out on him. I know, Izuku says, practically vibrating with excitement. Finally he's getting somewhere, he's so close to healing All Might and Ingenium. All he has to do is pass the license exam which, by the way, what will that entail? How much does he have to study? Is it written or is it just a demonstration of his quirk? Or both? What if he as if she can read his mind? Recovery Girl says, don't worry about the license exam now. I'll do everything I can to prepare you for it. But first, you need to focus on passing your final exams. Don't you want to go on that summer camp trip? Right. Yes. Izuku nods. As much as he wants to start rushing to prepare for the future, he needs to concentrate on what's just ahead of him. School comes first. He knows that, of course. That still doesn't stop him from being on a high for the rest of the week, though. Despite the pressure from the upcoming exams, it feels as if a weight has been lifted off his chest. He feels lighter and more carefree than ever before. He laughs with his friends at lunch and kicks Shinsu's ass during training, and he even joins a few study sessions when he can, although he mostly just ends up goofing around with Kaminari and Ashida. His friends notice his brighter mood too. Every time he manages to stop his quirk during his after-school lessons, his chest fills with warmth. A hopeful voice in the back of his mind whispers, "This is it, you're so close. You're so close to fixing everything. All Might's going to be strong again and Ingenium will run again and you won't have to worry about villains or anything." He supposes it's only inevitable that his high would come crashing down. It happens on Friday. It's the last day of actual learning before the hell of finals week. Their afternoon hero lesson turns out to be a joint lesson between classes 1A and 1B. Competition is in the air as All Might describes their training exercise, which seems to be some form of capture the flag. Since it will involve direct combat with quirks and will no doubt result in injuries, Izuku won't be participating. The two classes bicker good-naturedly as they make their way over to the Gamma field. It's been renovated by Sypnosis to make a more difficult terrain, not unlike the landslide area of USJ. Everyone except Izuku changes into their standard training uniforms while he gets to wear his healer costume. It doesn't include his capture weapon yet, since he's still not great at using it. But it will one day. "Alright, guys," Izuku says chidingly as they leave the changing room, tying up his ponytail. "I know you hero types like to get competitive, but try and play nice. Got it? Fuck, no. We ain't playing nice." Kaken bares his teeth as he leers at the Class B students. "We're gonna blow their asses up to bits." Metaphorically. Kirishima chirps, plopping an arm around Kaken's shoulder. However, even he looks competitive. The Class B students are a bit more refined, but no less eager. "Enjoy the spotlight while you still have it," Monoma says smoothly, "because in just a few minutes, Class B is going to knock you off your pedestal. Don't you dare underestimate us." Tetsuya Tetsu warns. Kaken opens his mouth to retort, but Izuku interrupts him. "Okay, time to go." He pushes the blonde forward and drags Kirishima away with his free hand. The rest of his classmates follow him, but he can see the looks they shoot towards their rivals. Save it for the field. The training commences soon afterwards, and Izuku watches from the sidelines with the teachers. The platform he, All Might, Aizawa, and Vlad King stand on is slightly elevated so that they can better see the students move around the rough terrain. It's fun to watch Izuku, of course, is mostly just keeping an eye out for injuries, but he can't help silently rooting for his classmates. He inhales sharply when Ashito nimbly evades an attack from Monoma and smiles when Todoroki defends their flag from two other Class B students. All Might and Vlad King occasionally call out encouragements or warnings. Aizawa watches silently, but Izuku can tell that he's pleased when he sees his students expertly working together to achieve their goal. Class B, however, doesn't go down so easily. Even though they didn't experience their own villain attack, their skills in combat are actually pretty good. Izuku can see that even some of his more proficient classmates are having trouble against the other students. He wonders how their training differs from Class A's training. There are some obvious differences in how Vlad King treats his students compared to Aizawa, the former being noticeably more friendly, but Izuku isn't sure if that would correlate to the skill of his students. His idle musings are suddenly interrupted by a blood-curdling scream. Startled, he tears his gaze away from where he was watching Kirishima wrestle with Tetsu, and quickly looks for the source of the screaming. It's coming from Class B's part of the field, but he can't see anyone on the ground. However, he does see multiple students stop and run over to a particular mountain of rubble. "Sensei!" Someone shrieks from behind the rubble, "Sensei! Sensei!" Izuku has already jumped off of the platform and is dashing across the field, the other teachers on his heels a moment later. It feels like it takes ages to reach the rubble, his legs not moving nearly as fast as he needs them to. All Might gets there first, and he only stops and stares for a moment before he turns and frantically calls for Izuku. When the boy finally reaches the scene, time seems to slow down. A group of students are crowding around someone lying on the ground. Kendo, his mind, supplies. She's the one who is screaming so terribly, and Izuku immediately notices why. Her right leg is broken badly, splayed out at an awkward angle and bleeding profusely. The jagged edge of her femur juts out of a messy gash in her blood-soaked skin, the sight of it making Izuku's heart leap to his throat. It's probably one of the worst injuries he's ever seen, but the severity only makes him rush over faster. "Out of my way!" he shouts as he shoves his way through the crowd. Kendo's teammates back away hastily as he drops to his knees beside her, making a little splash in the pool of blood that steadily grows beneath her. "What happened?" Vlad King demands behind him. Monoma is the only one that hasn't moved, staring down at Kendo with wide eyes. It was an accident," he stammers, face pale. She was jumping and I didn't mean to." Izuku doesn't pay attention to what he says, too busy analyzing Kendo's broken leg. He knows immediately that he can't just heal her right away, not with her bone sticking out like that. He'll have to fix it first, but he can't be too hasty or otherwise he'll end up healing it wrong. But God, she is losing blood so quickly. Will he even have time to fix it before she bleeds out? Panic builds within him like a wave, poised to crash down on him and drown him in fear. Crap, 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 this is bad, this is really bad. It doesn't help that Kendo is still awake and screaming in pain. Fuck, he wishes she was unconscious for this. Her cries are making everyone around him panic and he can hear a few students sobbing. They're crying and scared and he is too, but he needs to be strong right now. He's the only one who knows what to do and he needs to do it right. So, he swallows down his fear and focuses on what's in front of him. First things first, stop the bleeding. Blood is pouring out of the gash far too quickly for normal. It's gushing out in rhythmic spurts and he realizes that her femoral artery must have been severed by her broken bone. He needs to put pressure, but if he makes a tourniquet he'll risk causing further damage to her femur. So that leaves only one option. Inhaling sharply, he puts one gloved hand on her leg to steady it before carefully sliding his other hand into the gash, the wound making a sickening squelching sound as he does so. Kendo wails even louder and he struggles not to gag, feeling around the torn flesh for the severed edge of her artery. He finds it and pinches it as hard as he can until the blood stops spurting between his fingers. Kendo shrieks, the cry sounding as if it's being ripped from her throat. The wave of panic threatens to rise again, but Izuku forces himself to continue. Next, what's next? The bone. He needs to fix the bone. He'll probably heal it wrong, but Kendo can't wait for Recovery Girl to reach her, she'll bleed to death long before then. He just needs to set the bone as best he can. He needs more hands. Both of the classes have gathered around him at this point, either staring in horror or openly sobbing. He needs someone stable, someone who won't panic, someone like Aizawa-sensei. He shouts. The man is by his side in an instant. Reaching into his bag with his free hand, he pulls out a couple of latex gloves and shoves them at him. Put these on. Aizawa immediately obeys and kneels down on Kendo's other side. "What do you need me to do?" "Pinch the artery," Izuku orders. "I need both my hands to set her bone." "Feel where I'm pinching?" Aizawa's hand slides over his, fingers feeling around the throbbing artery in Izuku's grasp. He nods. "I'm gonna pull away on 3, alright? I need you to pinch as hard as you can." Aizawa nods again and Izuku counts down, 1, 2, 3. He yanks his hand away and Aizawa's takes over. Blood spews past his fingers. "Harder," Izuku demands, and Aizawa pinches harder until the spurting stops. The rest of the wound is still bleeding heavily, but at least it's not gushing out. With the bleeding now relatively under control, Izuku turns his attention to the broken femur. Grabbing the slippery edge of her bone, he pushes it back down into the marred flesh until the two jagged ends meet. Unfortunately, it's not a clean break. He can spot a couple of broken pieces stabbing into torn muscle. Reaching into the gore, he grabs them and hastily slides them into what he hopes is their proper place before removing his hands. Biting the edges of his blood-soaked gloves, he tears them off in one swift movement. Hands out. He barks at Aizawa. As soon the teacher lets go of the artery, blood starts spewing once more, but Izuku is quick to place his exposed hands on Kendo's leg. He doesn't even bother trying to control his quirk. The energy flows out of him rapidly, in response to such a huge injury, trying to heal it as quickly as possible. The speed of it leaves him feeling dizzy and drained, but he almost cries with relief when he feels smooth, undamaged skin beneath his fingers. It's not over yet, though. "Midoriya-kun." Aizawa's voice has him looking up. He follows the man's gaze to Kendo's face, taking in her pale skin and closed eyes. She must have fallen unconscious at some point. All too aware of the pool of blood beneath him, Izuku scrambles over to her upper body and stains her neck red as he feels for her pulse. Nothing. He blames it on his trembling fingers and presses his ear to her chest. Nothing. Her heart is silent and her lungs are still. The wave of panic surges once more, and this time he feels tears sting the edges of his eyes. "Fuck," he hisses under his breath and immediately moves to start chest compressions. Seeing him begin CPR sends a spike of terror through the crowd around him. "Midoriya-kun!" Aizawa exclaims. "What's stressed?" Izuku snaps. "She's going into hemorrhagic shock." "What's that?" one of the students cries out. This is absolutely not the best time for an anatomy lesson, but he knows how badly they must be freaking out, so he hastily explains, "She lost way too much blood way too quickly, and her body can't compensate for the sudden drop in blood pressure. She's going into cardiac arrest." Counting to 30, he quickly gives Kendo 2 rescue breaths before going right back to chest compressions. All around him, he's aware of students shouting, students sobbing, and fuck, he wants to too. He's not qualified for this. He's a 15-year-old boy who's only ever done CPR on dummies under his mentor's guidance. He's just meant to heal scrapes and bruises, not restart someone's heart. He can't do this. He can't. He doesn't want to be responsible for someone's life, but he has to. He has to. He knows he has to, because everyone is relying on him too. He'd rather die than give up now. He has the quirk, he has the training, he just needs to stop panicking and think. His hands move robotically as he begins the 3rd round of chest compressions, Kendo still limp beneath him. This is taking too long. He racks his brain, trying to come up with some solution. He needs to restart her heart, he needs a defibrillator, he needs Kaminari-kun. He barks, "Come here." His friend startles. "Me? Now?" Izuku snaps. He'll regret how harsh he sounds later, but it gets Kaminari to scramble to his side swiftly. Not pausing the chest compressions, Izuku asks, "You can control how many volts you discharge, right? Huh?" Kaminari looks at him with wide eyes. "Yeah, why?" Stopping, Izuku hurriedly tears open Kendo's uniform, sparing a brief wince of apology when he exposes her bra. Kaminari splutters as Izuku orders, I need you to shock her with 1000 volts. What? Kaminari yelps, horrified. Izuku understands his panic and feels bad for asking so much from him, but there's no time to waste. I'm sorry, but please Kaminari-kun. Without waiting for a response, Izuku quickly slides off one of Kendo's bra straps before grabbing Kaminari's hands and yanking him over, placing one above her right breast and the other on her left ribcage. You need to be quick, just a jolt, okay? He leans back, not wanting to get affected by the electricity. Now. Kaminari swallows, visibly forcing back tears, before looking down at Kendo. He squeezes his eyes shut and activates his quirk, Kendo's body jerking once as the electricity surges through her. Kaminari immediately backs away a second later and Izuku takes over once more. There are electrical burns on her chest now that he's quick to heal, before leaning down to press his ear against her sternum. Izuku feels his own heart give a leap of joy when he hears Kendo's heart throbbing faintly. He'll take a weak pulse over no pulse any day. Straightening up, he begins CPR again, but it only takes a few chest compressions before Kendo starts breathing again. The girl's gasps and coughs sound like music to Izuku's ears. He quickly rolls her onto her side where she promptly pukes, mixing vomit with blood. It's disgusting and it smells awful, but Izuku's never been happier to see someone throw up in his life. He pats her back and lets out a long shaky exhale, looking up. Everyone stares at him and Kendo with unmistakable relief in their eyes. Someone cries out Kendo's name, a few people release a fresh wave of tears, others look like they might faint, but everyone is visibly shaken, including the teachers. A hand touches his shoulder. All Might slowly kneels down next to him. Young Midoriya, take her to recovery girl, Izuku interrupts, rolling Kendo onto her back once she's finished vomiting. She's not out of danger yet. Her blood pressure is dangerously low, she needs fluids that his quirk can't replace. Tell her that she's in hemorrhagic shock and that she needs a blood transfusion immediately. All Might nods and begins to scoop Kendo, once again unconscious, up in his arms. As he does, Izuku glances at her classmates and asks, "Do any of you happen to know her blood type?" Most of the Class B students regretfully shake their heads, but one girl pipes up with a trembling voice, I think it's AB positive. She mentioned it once during our biology class. A universal recipient. Good. Izuku isn't sure how much blood recovery girl has stored or if she even has any, but at least she won't have to worry about giving her the wrong blood type. Izuku nods at All Might. Tell her that to go. With Kendo securely in his arms, All Might turns and disappears in a flash, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Once he's gone, the tension in the air seems to leave with him, and reality sinks in once more. God, one Class B student croaks, that was terrifying. Izuku finds himself wholeheartedly agreeing, although he doesn't say it aloud. Another girl looks at him worriedly. Is she going to be okay? I think so. Izuku swallows heavily, feeling dazed. The wave is still there, still building, still threatening to overwhelm him, but he forces it down once more. Later. Wiping his sweaty forehead on his sleeve, he clears his throat and says, she needs fluids. My quirk, it can't replace blood. I think I probably healed her bone wrong, too, so she'll need surgery. A flash of panic ripples through Class B, but thankfully Aizawa intervenes. Recovery girl will take care of her, he says, his voice calm and steady. He looks down at Izuku, thinly veiled concern in his dark eyes. Are you okay? No. Yeah. Izuku tries to stand, but his legs feel numb. Aizawa gently helps him up, taking his arm and putting it over his shoulder when his legs wobble unsteadily. He didn't realize it earlier, but his whole body is trembling violently. Aizawa notices and glances at him questioningly. Izuku swallows again and tries to brush it off. I just used my quirk a bit too quickly. It was a big injury too, so. Aizawa nods. I'll take you to. He cuts himself off, turning to look at the students. Izuku can't tell that he's torn. He wants to help Izuku, but he can't just leave Vlad King to take care of nearly 40 scared and probably now traumatized teenagers all by himself. Izuku makes the decision for him. "Don't worry, it's alright," he says, pulling away, "I can make it there on my own." Aizawa is clearly unconvinced, and so are his classmates. Kaken steps forward. "I'll take him." "No," Vlad King suddenly says, "Monoma-kun, you take him." Surprised, Izuku glances at Monoma. The boy is uncharacteristically quiet. In fact, Izuku doesn't think he's heard him make a single peep this entire time. He just stares at the pool of blood Kendo left behind, a haunted look in his eyes. He raises his head when Vlad King addresses him, but he still doesn't say a word. Vaguely, Izuku recalls him stammering something about it being an accident when his teacher demanded to know what happened. Whatever it was, Monoma's clearly feeling incredibly guilty about it. He probably isn't in a much better state of mind than Izuku, but part of him wonders if Vlad King just wants to give the boy something to do. So, ignoring Kaken's protests, Monoma quietly walks over to Izuku and takes Aizawa's place, wrapping Izuku's arm over his shoulder and bearing some of his weight. As they make their way out of the field, he hears his classmates murmur reassurances to Class B. "Don't worry, guys, Kendo-san is gonna be totally fine. I know that was scary, but Midoriya-kun took care of it. Yeah, Midoriya-kun knows what he's doing. Kendo-san will be better before you know it." Despite everything, Izuku feels his heart warm at his classmates' trust in him. Then, they leave the field, and silence presses down on him. The walk to the infirmary takes minutes or hours, Izuku can't really tell. All he knows is that the wave is rising again, and without something to focus on, it's harder to ignore. His heartbeat pounds in his ears, drowning out all other sounds as his trembling slowly gets worse. The pressure and sickening terror threatens to return, and in a last-ditch attempt to delay it even further, Izuku turns his attention to Monoma. The boy's eyes are fixed on the ground, his jaw visibly clenched. He looks like he's on the verge of tears but is stubbornly refusing to cry. Izuku can relate. He doesn't realize they've reached the main building until they're standing right in front of the infirmary. Monoma watches him carefully as he slips his arm off, silently asking if he's okay to stand on his own. Izuku nods and the blonde turns away without a sound. "Monoma-kun," Izuku rasps. Monoma pauses. You know, accidents happen. That's why I'm here. So, it's okay." Monoma doesn't look at him, doesn't say anything, but after a moment he nods stiffly and continues walking away. Figuring he did the best that he could, Izuku pushes the door open and walks in. As he expected, Recovery Girl is fussing over Kendo. The girl is lying on one of the beds, still pale and sweaty, but there's multiple needles and tubes sticking in her arms. A bag of blood hangs nearby. Good. Recovery Girl glances at him when he enters, then does a double take. Izuku doesn't know how he looks, but it must be bad, because her expression becomes concerned. "She'll be alright," she says. "I'm giving her fluids and I already did an X-ray of her leg. The bone healed wrong, so it'll need to be rebroken and set surgically, but that can wait. Right now I just want to focus on getting her stable." She pauses, her voice becoming a bit softer. "Toshinori-san told me what happened. I am very proud of you for acting so quickly and for staying calm in such a dire situation. Don't worry, I can take care of the rest on my own." It's both relieving and devastating at the same time. The former because he's shaken and tired, oh so tired. The latter because he knows he won't be able to hold back the wave any longer. "Please," he begs silently, "give me something to do. Please, I don't want to drown yet." It's a testament to their bond that Recovery Girl can hear his wordless plea loud and clear. Her lips press together. "Why don't you go clean yourself up?" she suggests gently. "Change back into your uniform. Then afterwards, if you don't mind, Go to 1B's homeroom and ask for Kendo-san's. Her clothes are kind of a mess. Her words sound slightly muffled, as if his ears are full of cotton. Izuku nods, numbly, and leaves to find the nearest bathroom. When he blinks, he finds himself already standing in front of the mirror. His eyes are wide, his skin is pale, and he's covered in blood. He pukes. The wave comes crashing down as he heaves his guts into the sink. Everything, all the emotions that he's been pushing back, all the panic and anxiety and unbridled terror comes flooding over him, overwhelming his senses and drowning him. He bursts into tears, sobbing uncontrollably as he hunches over the sink, gripping the edges with white knuckles and staining it red. He's drowning. He's drowning. He can't breathe. He can't do this. He vomits again, gagging until he has nothing left, until he's empty, but even then it's not enough. He opens his eyes and sees blood that isn't his. He clutches cold tile and feels cold skin instead. He gasps for breath that he had to force into another person's lungs because she wasn't breathing, and that is wrong, so horribly wrong. Over his wheezing gasps, he can hear someone step into the bathroom. Midoriya-kun? Izuku blinks through blurry, tear-filled eyes at whoever spoke. It takes a moment for him to realize that it's a Mijiki. The upperclassman is frozen, staring at him in shock for a few seconds before he rushes to his side. "Where are you hurt?" he demands, grabbing him by the shoulder. Izuku shakes his head frantically. "Midoriya-kun? I need you to tell me." "No," he croaks, his voice breaking. "No, it's not mine." He cuts himself off by coughing, wet and thick. A Mijiki pauses, looking both alarmed and confused. "It's not." "Oh." Izuku struggles to catch his breath, to get himself back under control, but when he reaches up to wipe away his tears, all he sees is his bloody hand. Then, he's drowning all over again. He doesn't know if he grabs a Mijiki or if a Mijiki grabs him, but suddenly he's clutching the other boy's back for dear life as he sobs into his jacket. He cries and cries until his mouth feels dry, until his head is pounding, but even then he continues to bawl. He buries his face into a Mijiki's chest as if that will help him forget the blood and the pain and the fear. Over his own wails, he can hear the boy's heartbeat against his ear. It's strong and loud and a bit faster than normal, but it's there, it's alive. Arms wrap around him, holding him steady even as his whole body trembles against his will. He doesn't even realize until a few minutes later that a Mijiki is muttering softly to him. He can't quite make out what he's saying, but the calm, steady drone of his voice is enough for him to latch onto. It's something to focus on, something that can break through his swirling emotions and lead him back to the surface. Slowly, ever so slowly, the panic runs out. It's not over quickly, but when it does finally end, Izuku is exhausted. He clings to a Mijiki for a few more minutes, just sniffling and listening to his heartbeat until he feels like he can finally breathe on his own. Reluctantly, he pulls away, although a Mijiki keeps his hands firmly on his shoulders. Izuku moves to wipe his tears, but then thinks twice and lets his blood-stained hand drop. "Midoriya-kun?" A Mijiki's soft voice reaches his ears. "Can you tell me what happened?" Inhaling shakily, Izuku nods, averting his gaze. A girl got hurt really badly," he croaks. Her heart street stopped and she wasn't breathing, but I fixed her. She's alright now, it's just." He sniffles and gives a Mijiki a wobbly smile, tears welling up in his eyes. "It was just really scary," he hiccups, his voice shattering into a million pieces. A Mijiki doesn't say anything for a few moments, just watches him as he quivers and lets his tears fall to the ground. Then, his thumbs rub against his shoulders, making him look up again. "Hey," a Mijiki says, giving him a kind smile, "why don't we get this blood off you, okay?" Izuku blinks and nods shakily. A Mijiki leads him back to the sink and turns on the faucet. He ends up doing most of the washing, taking his forearms in his hands and gently rubbing the blood off his skin. Izuku stays still, tiredly watching the water turn pink as it circles down the drain. He feels raw and vulnerable, but most of all he just feels exhausted. "Do you know where your uniform is?" Amajiki asks quietly, wiping away the last of the blood. Izuku has to think for a moment, his mind moving sluggishly. It's probably still in the low locker room. We were in the gamma field." Amajiki nods. "I can go get it for you, if you'd like to stay here. Or would rather come with me?" Izuku doesn't feel like he has the energy to go anywhere right now, but thought of being alone in silence makes a flash of panic rise in his throat. He grips Amajiki's sleeve tightly. It's enough of an answer for him. "Okay," Amajiki says, "let's go, then." He turns around and leads the way out of the bathroom. Izuku still grips his sleeve, and the older boy lets him. A part of him feels rather childish for holding on to Amajiki's sleeve as they walk down the hallway together, but a bigger part of him just recognizes it as something to help keep him grounded. "I'm sorry," he mumbles. "You probably have a class right now." "It's okay," Amajiki says. Izuku's eyes trail to the back of his jacket and he winces. "I got blood on your uniform." "That's okay too." Amajiki's response is no less patient. Through his muddled mind, Izuku subconsciously wonders why the older boy is being so kind to him. Out of the trio of third years, he knows Amajiki the least. The raven-haired boy is always there when Izuku hangs out with Nejire and Mirio, but he never says much. From what Izuku has gathered, he seems to have a rather timid, introverted personality. Mirio says that he just gets nervous really easily, but he doesn't seem very nervous right now. He moves with purpose, almost confidently. His arms were strong and his voice never wavered when he held Izuku. He seemed to know exactly what to do to help the freckled boy calm down. Izuku briefly wonders how he knew, but his thoughts are interrupted when they pass by Class 1A. "Oh," he says, tugging Amajiki's sleeve to make him stop. Actually, I think one of my friends might have brought my uniform back with them." Amajiki follows his gaze to the large door. His eyes widen slightly and he gulps. Oh. He looks down at Izuku, suddenly appearing a bit nervous, but then he straightens up. "Oh, okay. Okay. Wait here." Taking a deep breath, he walks over to the door and knocks. The murmuring inside the classroom stops, and the door slides open a moment later. A pause. "Yes?" Aizawa's blank voice demands. Amajiki shrivels slightly. Do you have Midoriya-kun's uniform?" Aizawa is silent. Murmurs ripple through the class. Izuku shifts slightly so that he's within Aizawa's line of sight. The man's eyes dart over to him, and Izuku is all too aware that his own eyes are probably still red and puffy from crying. Aizawa glances between him and Amajiki, lingering on the noticeable wet patch on the upperclassman's chest, as well as the blood staining his jacket. Turning around, he barks, "Bakugo-kun!" He disappears for a moment and Izuku can hear his friend bickering a bit with the teacher. When Aizawa reappears, he shoves Izuku's neatly folded uniform into Amajiki's hands. "Here." Thanks," Amajiki stammers. He opens his mouth to say more, then apparently loses his confidence and whirls around. "Okay, bye." He shuffles back over to Izuku. Aizawa looks at him one last time, dark eyes roaming over him. Izuku gives him a weak smile and the teacher sniffs before closing the door. Amajiki lets out a sigh of relief. All right," he says, seemingly to himself. Looking at Izuku, he straightens up once again and nods. "Okay, let's, go back to the bathroom." Izuku wordlessly follows him. His mind will dissect that interaction later. Right now, he's too tired to do anything other than listen to what Amajiki tells him to do. They return to the bathroom, which is thankfully still empty. Amajiki helps him out of his costume and washes away the blood that managed to soak through to his skin. Izuku does the best he can with his uniform, but his trembling fingers fumble with the buttons of his shirt, so Amajiki helps him with them. He's so patient with him, even when Izuku is being more helpless and pathetic than ever before. A knot forms in his throat. "I'm sorry," he finds himself whispering. "You don't have to apologize," Amajiki says calmly, buttoning up to his collar. Izuku averts his gaze. "It's stupid," he croaks. I'm gonna be a healer. I'm gonna be dealing with stuff like this all the time. But I cried like a baby as soon as I saw some blood. It's so stupid it's not," Amajiki interrupts. His voice suddenly more firm. "Panic attacks aren't stupid." Izuku blinks. Panic attack? Is that what that was? He knows what they are, of course, but... "Oh," he whispers, dropping his gaze. Amajiki's hands don't stop moving. Once he's done with the buttons, he grabs Izuku's tie off the counter and wraps it around his neck. After a few seconds of silence, he says, "Being strong isn't easy." Izuku glances up at him. His eyes are focused on the tie, but they dart to Izuku's briefly. "Some people may make it seem like it is, but you're allowed to be scared." Once he finishes, he takes a step back. "Is there anything else you need to do?" Recalling his mentor's request, Izuku says, I just have to get Kendo-san's uniform. She's the girl that got injured, but, I think I can do it by myself." Glancing at himself in the mirror, he frowns at his puffy eyes. He can't show up to Class B looking like this. He starts trying to rub the redness away, but Amajiki stops him. "Don't," he says, "that'll make it worse." Here he grabs a paper towel and wets it with cold water. "Just dab at them with this. It'll help the swelling go down." Izuku does as he says. He wants to ask how Amajiki knows all this stuff, how he knew exactly how to help him. But something tells him that it's not the right time. Besides, this seems oddly personal. When the redness around his eyes starts to fade away, Izuku sighs softly. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Amajiki says. He hesitates. "And if you ever feel like that again, you can come to me. If you want." Izuku smiles tiredly. "Thanks." He pauses. "Senpai." A light flush dusts Amajiki's cheeks, but he smiles back nevertheless. He does have to go back to class after that sans blood-stained jacket, but Izuku can feel his gaze lingering on him as they part ways. He wearily makes his way over to Class 1B's homeroom, hoping that he doesn't look like too much of a mess now. He's still shivering slightly, and he probably can't hide his fatigue, but he just hopes that they won't be able to tell that he was crying in the bathroom for the past 20 minutes. Sighing, he knocks on the door and waits. A voice inside tells him to come in and he hesitantly slides the door open. The entirety of Class 1B's attention turns to him and he forces a smile on his face. "Midoriya-kun." Tetsu exclaims, "Is Kendo-san alright? Is she gonna be okay?" Another boy asks. "Is she in surgery? When will she be back?" Everyone, quiet down." Vlad King barks loudly. Once his students fall silent, he turns to Izuku. He doesn't hide his own worry very well. "How is she, Midoriya-kun?" Clearing his throat, Izuku repeats what Recovery Girl told him. The students and teacher listen with rapt attention. "I can promise you that by next week she'll be completely better," he finishes. "I'll make sure of it." Everyone lets out a collective sigh of relief. "That was really scary," one girl whimpers. "Yeah," Hanuki agrees solemnly, looking at Izuku. "You were amazing, though, Midoriya-kun." His classmates murmur in agreement as Izuku flushes. He's about to brush it off when Tetsu abruptly stands. "I know we don't know each other too well," he says, "but can I give you a hug, man?" "Huh?" Izuku blinks in surprise, but other students are getting up as well. "Yeah, I need to give him a hug too." "You deserve it, dude. Thank you so much." The next thing he knows, he's being swarmed by the students of Class B. Multiple hands ruffle his hair and pat his back. Tetsu squeezes him to his chest and whispers tearfully, "So manly." Over and over again. Hanuki invites him to eat lunch with them sometime and Awase tells him that he's now an honorary member of Class B. The other students wholeheartedly agree. Izuku is both overwhelmed and flattered. Alright, Vlad King says after a moment, don't crowd him. He shoos his students back to their seats, but even he plops a grateful hand on Izuku's head. Politely ducking away, Izuku says, actually, I came here to ask where I can find Kendo-san's uniform? Oh. The same girl that told him about Kendo's blood type jumps up. We brought it back from the changing room. Here. She takes the uniform out of her bag and gives it to him. Thanks, he says, then turns to the door. I've gotta go back to the infirmary now, so. The students bid him goodbye and continue to thank him repeatedly as he leaves. Then, he's walking back through the halls and stepping into the infirmary. Recovery girl glances up as he enters and thankfully doesn't question why he took so long. Nausea returns with a vengeance when he looks at Kendo's unconscious form lying on the bed and he quickly averts his gaze. Recovery girl notices. She quietly thanks him and takes the uniform from his hands. Then, you should go back to your classroom now, Midoriya-kun. He almost protests. Almost. He may have fooled Class B, but his friends will be able to see right through his forced smile, especially Kaken. He still feels fragile, like the dam might break again if someone prods at him. But he desperately does not want to be in the infirmary any longer. So he nods and turns to leave. And don't worry about today's lesson, his mentor adds, you get the day off. Nodding again, he closes the door behind him. Takes a deep, shuddering breath. Then continues down the hallway. He almost raises his hand to knock when he reaches his classroom. But that would be stupid, he never needs to knock. Besides, that would only stop the lesson and bring more attention to himself. Maybe he can just creep in? As soon as he slides open the door, all eyes land on him. Then Midoriya-kun. It's almost comical how everyone simultaneously shouts. Much like Class B, Izuku's classmates all stand up and swarm around him, pulling him into hugs and asking how he is and telling him what a good job he did. Izuku almost laughs when Kirishima hugs him tightly and whispers, so manly. Over and over just like Tetsu did. Oi, you fuckers, let him breathe. Kaken snaps, shoving his way to the front. Despite his words, he practically squeezes the breath out of Izuku as soon as he reaches him. You're fucking crazy, you know that? He growls into his ear. When he pulls away, however, Izuku could swear that he looks proud. The lump in Izuku's throat returns and he has to forcibly blink back tears. Unlike before, though, it's for a much better reason. Thanks, guys, he chokes out. Todoroki appears by his side. Are you okay? He asks slowly, gaze roaming over his face. Izuku sniffles and it doesn't go unnoticed by either him or Kaken. Still, Izuku gives him a shaky smile and nods. Yeah, I'll be alright. I'm mostly just tired. Dude. Izuku squeaks as Kaminari glomps him. That was freaking scary, man. I can't believe you held it together. I felt like I was having a heart attack the entire time. He pulls back to look at him. You're fucking amazing, dude. Twisting in his grasp, Izuku grabs his cheeks and smiles at him. Me? You're the one who was amazing. I'm sorry I had to drag you into that. Kaminari shakes his head so hard Izuku is worried it hurts. No way, man, don't be. That was the scariest, coolest thing I've ever done. Besides, the blonde grins back at him. Now I have something to brag about to the ladies. He tries to wink and fails, making Izuku snort despite himself. Sero pushes Kaminari's face away. Oi, don't flatter yourself. Everyone knows Midoriya-kun did all the work. Ashido hugs Izuku from the back and says, yeah, screw school, you're already a hero. Izuku flushes as Ida splutters and starts giving Ashido a lecture about the importance of school. He can't tell the other boy isn't too serious, though he chops his hands extra dramatically to make his classmates laugh. Speaking of school, Aizawa's voice drawls, it's not over yet. Get back to your seats, you brats. Everyone reluctantly obeys, pulling away from Izuku. And Midoriya-kun. Aizawa stops him as he makes his way back to his seat. The man's lips quirk up slightly and he gives him an approving nod. Good job. Izuku's cheeks heat up. Thanks. He squeaks, then adds, and, thanks for helping me. HMN. Izuku turns away and hastily scrambles back to his seat. There's only about half an hour left of class, but he tries to focus on the lesson anyway, despite jumping in so late. The same can't be said for his friends, who glance at him more than occasionally throughout the period. He isn't sure if they keep looking at him because of what he did or because they've noticed that he's been crying. He has to force himself not to sniffle or rub his eyes. More than anything, he really just wants to go home and cuddle with Sushi. Maybe, even Kaken will join him. He's a pretty good cuddler, even if he's not the touchy-feely type. Izuku would much rather be surrounded by his burnt sugar scent and the metallic stench of blood that still seems to linger on him. Finally, the bell rings and Izuku gets up. Before he can grab his bag, though, Kaken grabs it for him. At his questioning glance, the blonde grunts, "You're exhausted, aren't you? I can carry our stuff." Normally, Izuku might protest that he's more than capable of carrying his things. "Thank you very much," but right now he's just grateful. "By the way, Midoriya," Todoroki says, following Izuku as he follows Kaken to the door, "All Might was looking for you." "He was?" Izuku tilts his head. "Said he couldn't find you on his way back from the infirmary." Todoroki shrugs. "He must have just missed you." Izuku isn't quite sure how that would have happened, but he pushes it out of his mind for now. He'll text All Might later. Maybe after he's taken a nap. They arrive at the door and Kaken reaches his hand out, but it abruptly slides open with a bang before he can even touch it. "Hello, Class 1A." Mirio shouts enthusiastically. Izuku splutters. "What the fuck?" Kaken growls. "The hell are you doing here?" With the majority of the class staring at him now, Mirio puffs up his chest and declares, "I've come to kidnap my kuhai." In the blink of an eye, he darts forward and scoops Izuku up into his arms. Izuku yelps in surprise, clutching his bicep. "Oi, fuck off." Kaken snarls, lunging towards him. Nejiire suddenly pops out from behind Mirio's back, blocking Kaken's attack. "Oh, this one's feisty." She fearlessly pats the blonde spiky hair, squealing with laughter when he tries to bite her hand. He's like a rabid dog. "Fuck you." Kaken shrieks. "Bakugu-kun." Ida scolds, appearing with a chop of his hand. That is no way to speak to an upperclassman. "Fuck you too." Wincing at the loud noises, Izuku glances up at Mirio and whines. "Senpai, what are you doing?" Mirio grins down at him. "Like I said, we've come to kidnap you." "Why?" Todoroki asks in his typical blank tone. Nejiire traps his cheeks between her palms, much to the boy's surprise, and pouts. "Can't a girl take her kuhai out for a treat?" Blinking slowly, Todoroki silently pushes her hands away in response. "A treat?" Izuku asks, feeling a little hesitant. "I don't know guys, I'm kind of tired." "Don't worry, I'll carry you the whole time if I have to." Mirio chirps, then smiles, his eyes softening. "Come on, you deserve a break." Izuku blinks in surprise and confusion. Then, a Majiki appears beside Mirio, giving him an encouraging smile. "It'll be fun," he says quietly, "I promise." Oh. Now it makes sense. Of course a Majiki would have told his friends about what happened. Izuku's cheeks flush slightly in embarrassment, but neither of them look pitying. Well, he is tired, but if a Majiki says it'll be fun, then it must be. Besides, he doesn't think the older boy would do anything that would make him uncomfortable and stress him out even more. A Majiki's been nothing but helpful today, so Izuku trusts him. Hanging out with his senpais sounds a lot better than going home and crying some more anyways. Alright, he relents. Mirio and Nejiire let out simultaneous whoops of joy. Kaken is not pleased. You just said you were tired. He protests. Oh, I was dead serious about carrying him, Miru says, grinning brightly in the face of Kaken's scowl. The explosive blonde wrinkles his nose and tries again. Don't you have a lesson with recovery, girl? She gave me the day off, Izuku says. I'm gonna go with them. Kaken growls. I'll text you when I get home, okay? Kaken looks pissed, but Mirio doesn't wait for a response. Alrighty then, let's go. He turns around and promptly marches away with Izuku in his arms, Amajiki following silently. Bye-bye, baby heroes. Nejire chirps, waving at his classmates as she walks away. Behind him, Izuku hears Kaminari mutter, "What just happened?" The hallways are soon teeming with students leaving their classrooms, but the crowd parts as Mirio and Nejire come marching through. Confused glances are shot at Izuku, who is still being carried bridal style in Mirio's arms. Amajiki trails after them with his head ducked. When they reach the main gate, Izuku asks warily, "So, what are we doing?" "Whatever you want," Mirio replies, cheerfully, "Like I said, it's our treat. We could go get ice cream, how about that?" Just the thought of eating makes Izuku's stomach churn with nausea. He shakes his head. "I'm not really hungry." Mirio and Nejire share a quick, fleeting glance that Izuku misses, before Mirio straightens up. "No worries, we can do something else. Yeah, we can go to the park, or the beach, or go watch a movie." Nejire starts listing a number of activities, all of which don't seem particularly appealing to Izuku right now, or go to a museum, or the zoo, or, hey, there's a new karaoke club that opened nearby actually, Amajiki interrupts with his soft voice. "Why don't we go to a cafe? We can order some tea and just relax for a bit." Izuku smiles and nods. "That sounds nice." Mirio and Nejire perk up. "Perfect," Mirio says, "wonderful idea, Tamaki-kun. Let's go to a cafe." He shifts his grip on Izuku. "Are you really going to carry me the whole time?" the freckled boy asks dubiously. "Yup." Mirio grins, then stops. "Hold up." He puts Izuku down before squatting in front of him. He gestures to his broad back. "Hop on." Amajiki huffs while Izuku giggles in amusement. Rolling his eyes, he leans forward and wraps his arms around Mirio's well-muscled shoulders. Hands grab onto his legs and hike him further up as Mirio stands. "Now we're ready to go." The walk to the cafe is short, but very fun. Piggyback rides are a rare luxury for Izuku, and unlike Kaken, Mirio doesn't get tired of it after 5 minutes. Izuku smiles and rests his chin on his shoulder, listening idly as Mirio and Nejire chatter non-stop. The cafe is a cute little shop at the end of a not-so-busy street. Amajiki immediately retreats behind Mirio as Nejire asks the waiter for a table, and they soon find themselves sitting at a comfy booth in the corner. "So, what are you thinking of ordering?" Mirio asks, blatantly peering over Izuku's shoulder at his menu even though he has one of his own in his hands. On Izuku's other side, Amajiki suggests, "You should get chamomile tea. It helps." He doesn't say with what, but the answer is fairly obvious. Izuku nods. "Okay. I think I'll get jasmine tea," Nejire says. "I'm getting ramen," Mirio says. The three turn to stare at him. He blinks. "What?" "We came here for tea, dummy," Nejire says. "But I like ramen." "It's almost July," Amajiki murmurs, "it's too hot for ramen." "What do you guys have against ramen?" "Nothing, it's just an inappropriate time of the year. Tea is hot, but you guys are still ordering it. That's different." "How?" Izuku giggles to himself as they continue to bicker. Mirio does end up ordering ramen, but Nejire forces him to sit at the far end of the booth so his salty ramen smell doesn't ruin their tea. Whatever that means. All this results in Mirio and Nejire yelling unnecessarily loudly across the table so they can hear each other. Amajiki shrivels under the glares the other patrons shoot their way. Even though it's loud, something about this situation seems peaceful to Izuku. He giggles at his senpai's silly antics and idly listens to their meaningless conversation. Thankfully, they don't try too hard to get him to join in, clearly understanding that he's more than happy to just listen. His mind occasionally wanders back to Kendo and the incident, but the wave of panic has boiled down to a simmer that he can easily ignore for now. As he sips his tea, he finds himself slowly getting more and more drowsy. Amajiki is a warm presence beside him, his mellow personality a perfect contrast to his friends. When Izuku finishes his drink, the older boy takes the cup from his hands and sets it down on the table. "Thanks, Amajiki-senpai," he says. Mirio and Nejire both gasp dramatically. "Senpai?" Mirio exclaims, his eyes sparkling, "When did this happen?" "Please don't make it weird," Amajiki groans at the ceiling. "You should just call him Tamaki-senpai," Nejire says, "since you call us by our first names." Izuku's cheeks heat up. Amajiki's face flushes too. "He can call me whatever he wants," he says with a tone that's almost defensive. Mirio and Nejire pick up on it immediately and grin at each other wickedly. "Okay," Nejire sing-songs. "Whatever you say." Amajiki grumbles to himself, but thankfully the other two go back to their incessant chatter a moment later. Izuku glances at him and decides to just brush it off as Mirio and Nejire being weird as usual. He isn't sure how long they stay in the cafe for. The sun starts to set outside, spilling orange light through the windows and painting the cafe in warm hues. It's nice, just sitting here with his senpais and relaxing. It's almost as if nothing bad even happened today. He unconsciously finds himself slowly leaning against Amajiki's shoulder, the pleasant mood mixed with the chamomile tea steadily breaking down his resolve to stay awake. Yawning, he gives one last valiant effort to keep his drooping eyelids open and fails miserably. As soon as his head hits Amajiki's shoulder, he falls fast asleep. Oh my god, he's so cute. Guys. Quick, take a picture. What? No. Oh, come on, this is adorable. Don't Tamaki-kun, there is no force on this earth that will stop me from taking this picture. This is gold. This is so weird. SHH, you're gonna wake him up. Nah, he's out like a light. Leave him alone, he's had a tough day. Aw you, Tamaki-kun, I love seeing you get so protective. Shut up. Should we take him home? I can carry him. We don't even know where he lives. Well, we can't wake him up, he's too cute. Can we keep him? No, we can't keep him. Hang on, I think I know someone who can tell us his address. Who? A mutual friend. Let me just text him real quick. Hey, remember to send me that picture later, okay? Of course, are you kidding? This is gonna be one of our most treasured heirlooms.